Not very good with social media.
It's okay. I don't use social media much either.
Really?
Yes, really. And it rots the mind. I like going
because
outside.
on social media you're only judged by what you say, so there'd be no point in him even wasting his time playing it, is it? That'd be like some guy in a wheelchair trying to do Donkey Kong in real life. Like, ain't gonna work for you, mate. Just stay on the floor. Don't worry about it.
I thought tonight was about roasting me, not Loco.
That's what I think, but
It's a mixed bag on the show. Don't worry about it. Right, are we ready to go?
yeah, 80 was gonna be the special episode because it was gonna be the episode where Listen Loco passes Summoning Insight in number of episodes.
I mean, I was about to mention that right now, but you've just ruined that. So
Okay, fine. I'm sorry. What the fuck? How am I supposed to read your mind?
No, I'm joking. You can't know that. Like, let's just start. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Right, welcome to episode 80 of Listen Loco. So Listen Loco now just got to the same number of episodes that Summoning Insight, probably
Wow.
the greatest League of Legends talk show
I never knew
ever
that.
had. Yeah, exactly.
Such a surprise.
Wow.
Exactly. Because what I needed to do was send a message to, like, you have to understand, Unlimited, I'm not really going to do like loads of episodes of Summoning Insight, so it's never going to actually beat Listen Loco because we have it 2 times a week. But I needed to just send a message to Loco.
Yeah.
Like, he probably thought he was ready to surpass Summoning Insight, what I did there with Monty, and probably thought, in the modern day, I'm like the new Monty. And I just had to send him a message that, like, you're not there yet. You might be catching up, but you haven't quite gotten there yet. And so just, be humble, take a step back, and eventually it'll come. Don't be so greedy. Don't just grasp for it,
Dude,
Exactly.
anytime you talk about being humble, oh my god, it reminds me of this ex I had. If I brag too much or people recognize me and then I was feeling good about myself, she would always put on Humble by Kendrick Lamar and then she would just stare at me until like I calmed down.
Did it work? Did you become more humble?
It worked. Anytime that song comes on, I'm like, oh my god, I should shut the fuck up or she could be mad.
Well, another one of those brilliant League of Legends related stories there, guys. One of those anecdotes from the analyst and former coach, Listen Loco / Locodoco / Azubu Frost Locodoco / Mig Frost Locodoco / not Segentus Frost Locodoco.
Okay.
Just left that last part in there. It's a horrible thing to say for no reason, right? Our guest for this episode is Unlimited, who used to play a long time ago as a support player for Copenhagen Wolves, most famously, where he was actually the lane partner at one point in time of Forgiven, if people don't know that. It's a long, long time ago.
Yeah, and Freeze as well.
Freeze as well. Yeah, you had a couple of the...
And
they were kind
even
of
Rekkles for a bit.
Wow.
Yes, briefly in the challenger scene, exactly. So you've had a pretty good set of people. Maybe we'll talk about that. So obviously now, the relevance now is he is the coach of SK Gaming, who, if you remember, they've been through quite a lot of coaches this year, to be fair. But this split, he's been coaching them. They started out pretty badly. They actually had a really bad streak at one point in time. They had like 7 games in a row. I think you lost.
8, yeah.
Oh yes, you lost to Rogue as well. My mistake, because in my mind that game was unlosable. You have to.
That's what we thought as well.
Yeah, exactly. I turned it off when you were like approaching the Nexus. I thought, this is over. I trust them to close this game out. Listen, if I know SK Gaming, this game's cool. I went away. Next thing I know, Rogue won the game. So anyway, yeah, 8 games in a row. But actually, in the last couple of weeks, have turned it around a bit. Been getting a better round record. I think it's like 50% win rate the last couple of weeks. That's a couple of decent wins. We could see you the whole time.
Really?
We didn't really miss you, so...
That doesn't even make any sense whatsoever.
Okay, well, no, my stream dropped. I saw my stream dropped. So that's why I was like laying on my bed. Oh my god. Wait, I'm pretty sure, 100% your stream dropped.
Well, that's the one killed. Right, so what's going on then? Tell me what's going on.
Let me refresh chat and let me check.
I'm not doing all that again.
Well, my internet dropped.
That's gone. It's just gone. That's going to be the beginning of the episode.
And we could just move on.
No, that'll be the end of the episode.
What the fuck?
It was a pleasure.
My internet
Thank you,
dropped.
guys.
Yeah. Well, I can't recreate the whole fucking thing, can I? I'll just have to start differently.
Okay, start differently.
Start again.
Okay.
Right, this is episode 80 of Listen Loco. There was already 80 episodes of Summoning Insight. This guy's from SK Gaming.
No, that part worked. That part was fine. That part was fine. That part was fine.
I'm not going to do the whole company rules. I'll just go like this.
Yeah.
Like, for people who don't know, let's talk to him about one of the most famous AD carries he played, which was Forgiven, right? So
I thought it was Rekkles.
we're going to get to that in a minute, mate. So we'll just do it this way. We'll go in order that you had them, basically, because it went. For people who don't know, it went Forgiven, Rekkles, and it went Rekkles, Forgiven, Freeze.
Actually, it was Freeze, Rekkles, Forgiven, Freeze. we actually
before you were
we were in Samurai Jeans, and we got we didn't manage to qualify. We actually
you
lost
to the Sinners Never
to
Skip team that came out of the
and
dogs.
to
Yes.
Copenhagen Wolves. Actually, they denied
Right.
us entrance to.
Okay, right. Well, let's go. We'll do the freeze one later because there's more later in your career. It's the interesting period, you know. Okay, all right. Let's talk about Rekkles then. So, interestingly enough, you played with Rekkles, but before most people are going to know him, because if you remember, Rekkles came along initially. Actually, people don't know as a stand-in for Fnatic. He wasn't actually a full-time player because he was so young. He wasn't even 17. Then he couldn't play in LCS initially for the first 2 splits because he was underage. And so during this time, what he did was he went and played in Copenhagen Wolves, which was it wasn't actually the Challenger scene at the time. It was like a bunch of tournaments that were kind of like what the Challenger scene became later. It was basically like the open circuit, even though LCS had begun, but it's for the level below. And if people remember, Copenhagen Wolves won a lot of these tournaments. They were actually one of the best teams. And Rekkles basically, at the time, I have to be fair, mate, Rekkles was pretty much the only person everyone knew in your team. And the rest of you got to be known later on, but that's the main reason people watched the team. So what was young Rekkles like before the time with Fnatic and Yellow Star and all the rest of what people will know? What was he like as a young guy?
I mean, he was a funny guy. We just played cards and stuff like that. He didn't know much about the game, but I didn't either. So we're kind of finding out together how to play the game. But playing with him was like playing with a superstar already, because when we were at LAN events, like there would be lines, like just fans lined up for Rekkles, whether we win or lose, you know, and we would just sit around and just wait for him to finish, you know, his parade.
Of course. That's life, right?
Yeah, that's why me and Doran hang out together.
What about obviously, like you said, he was a very different player at the time. Like one of the things I think is probably very underrated, I think personally, about all bot lane players is like it's not like their careers are in isolation. You have to look at who they played with. Like I've no doubt playing with great support players like some ones he's had probably changed him as a player. So who was he back in that season? Like was he a very aggressive player? Was he a very vocal player? What was he like as a teammate?
To be honest, I don't remember much since it was so long ago, but I think he was going for scaling back then already. Like he was trying to finish 2 items at the same time. That's what I remember. And he was trying to get IE and Static Sheath.
Yeah.
And building BS Sword into Zeal into both of the items completed. And when these items are complete, the game was over. So this was our game plan.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Yeah. All I'm gonna say is this, Loco. If you're a player and you're like a superstar player and you play on a lesser team, what you do is you hard carry. It's like playing solo queue. You think, right, I can't trust everyone else. I'm gonna have to get the resources myself and carry the game, right? So what you do is you play super hard up in lane. You go for every CS. You play matchups that you can be abusive of. What Rekkles did was he actually probably does come from the future. And he basically like primed himself for what the rest of his career would be, which is if you're on a team that has Super 6 solo laners and you're going to get carried, you just get all your items. You play nice and safe. And at the end of the game, you go, so as an X-Packer, did you not finish the game? Right, I guess I'll have a go then. You go, right, just sit outside. While they're all dying inside a little circle like that. Like basically, in Rekkles' mind, there's like a Zyra ultimate, and he never enters that. That's like the center of the team fight. He stays on the outside because he'll probably get knocked up by a Zyra ultimate, maybe from playing in Season 3. And then he just stays outside shooting everyone, and then because he last hits all the champions, and it shows Rekkles kills, pentakill, all the fans are like, fucking hell, he carried the whole game. It's like, well, Genja once did that in a match against Copenhagen Wolves, and I don't really know if he did carry that game. I think he just auto-attacked with Caitlyn on all the champions. He got the last kill.
He did well.
Just saying, you know, I don't hear any of you bigging up old Genja from that match, do you? They'd stop him getting relegated, though. Anyway, let's go on to the next part.
I do want to ask him about a little bit about the Rekkles part. So if he was so focused on carrying from like an early age, like carrying in terms of team fight and being stronger later, was he just more confident in his team fight abilities than he was in laning? Like, is that why he steered towards that playstyle, or do you think there's a specific reason for it?
I mean, to be honest, I'm not sure, but I don't think we're a very dominant lane or anything like that, so maybe that's why he just went for his scaling approach. We would just lane, get out of lane even, and then once the items are like completed, we just team fight and the game is over, and it was the easiest way to win the game. So I think that's why he took this approach.
Okay, because usually when players feel really confident about lane, they'll be so meticulous about every little detail. They're like, oh, why didn't you walk up here? We could have denied them this CS. Or like, you need to make sure you're always perpendicular to me when we're like playing lane. Like in this matchup,
I don't think we're reviewing any games at that time.
Okay.
Not with Rekkles, not with the coach. Just we play a game, take a break 5 minutes, go next game. Like I don't think the reviews were really a thing back
Yeah,
then.
to be fair, this was 2013, so like put it so you weren't even at coach yet, so
even back then, like I did that when I laned, and I know Chowster and
yeah,
Double
you're
did
Korean,
that.
mate.
No, Chowster and Double did that also. They were super
Okay.
meticulous about like
They
their
were the best
laning.
bot lane in the world,
Like
but yeah.
even bot laners like that aren't the greatest in the world, right? If they're really confident about their laning, like they will be anal with their lane partner about, hey, we can fix this part, we can
Yeah, I
fix
mean,
this part.
this is
and
what happened
be
with
really
Forgiven,
driven
right?
down.
So this is the next part where
Sure.
at the beginning we had really rough start because we weren't doing so well in lane, and that was like the most important thing for Costas. So we were fighting constantly in the beginning. He thought I was playing too passive. I thought he was playing wrong, So we didn't really get along at the beginning, but as we played like for 1 or 2 months, then I kind of picked up on his playstyle, even though some comments might have been harsh, but they did make me a better player, so I appreciate it.
For people who don't know, the interesting thing about this discussion that we've basically set up, and in fact contrasting these two players that you just happen to have one after the other, is that for people who don't know, obviously AD carried the role. If you think of the most basic cliched version of it, it's actually supposed to be the late game role. You're supposed to do all the damage in the team fight. You're supposed to just survive the lane and get your items. That's the reason why actually, even though I joked about him earlier, I always thought people used to go way too harsh on Genja because he didn't care about the lane. Because his philosophy for real in his team was like, I have one of the best team fighting teams in the world. Why don't I just get my 3 items and then I'm going to win the team fight? Who gives a fuck about the lane? Like, what, you came out with 12 extra CS? Well, yeah, brilliant, great. I'm going to win the team fight. Like, so at the time, actually, a lot of players might have this mentality. Whereas when along came the likes of Forgiven, Uzi actually did it as well in China, their actual philosophy to playing the lane is very different to a lot of AD carries because their whole concept was you contest every creep. It's almost like they took the principle in Dota of denying, and they were like, instead of literally denying, I'll just always harass him so he can't get the creep, and that way I'll win the CS advantage. Early on, I'll have my items and my lead, and I'll actually just try and smash out of the lane. Like, forget the team fight. We're going to try and dominate from minute 1 to minute 50 or whatever, and hopefully the game ends long before that. So I can understand totally, by the way, why when this style came along, because for people who don't know, Uzi I's career, bizarrely, is actually one of the most overrated of all time because people only knew him at the World Championships. And so they never saw his development as a player. Like, they think the player he is today is who he was in 2013. He was actually a very, very different player. And actually, the reason why I tie him into this example is it was very easy when you actually saw him play in the LPL to see that he was a flawed player because this style that they have, I'd almost describe it as what someone like Caps does in mid lane now. It's like by going for every aggressive play and always playing up all the time, whether you have the help or not, it's like, that initially looks like a bad style, looks way too risky. But the point is, if you are like a god tier player, maybe you can walk that tightrope and make it work all the time.
It was a tightrope for sure.
It's going to look amazing if you do, though, isn't it? That's the problem, is you got to get everyone on board to do it if you're a bot laner, though.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think the hardest part is getting your support along with you. And if you can get your jungler along with you as well, then the game is over. You already won.
Sure.
But it definitely felt like walking a tightrope because like pressure. Oh, jungle gang. Now we have to start from the beginning. Game is over. Let's go.
Like, everyone knows the feeling, right, of being the team that starts on the bottom side of the map, right, and then you push all the way up, you push them on their tower, and then they have that brush right over where you are, and then they just come out and kill you, the jungler, right? The problem is, Forgiven's logic on that, by the way, it's actually a bit like what Piglet does in the modern day, except Piglet never had the fucking team to do it with, is if they come out of the jungle there, right, your logic's supposed to be Loco. Like, don't push up so much. Like, be aware that he could be there, and maybe sometimes back off and give up a wave. Whereas, like, you have to understand Forgiven's logic and Piglet's as well is like, first of all, my jungler should know he's there, and then secondly, even if he comes out, it's no excuse not to win 2v3. Which is like, well, all right then, mate. Like, that's one way to say it. Like, fucking hell. Like, it kind of is their mentality, though, right?
Yeah, it is for sure, and. I mean, it kind of teaches you how to play 2v3 in a lane.
Sure. Yeah, it's like I'll actually use the joke that everyone used to use for Loco, but it is kind of like the training weight scenario. It's like you're playing an even harder game. So as a result, if you then get to play 2v2, it feels like a fucking hot stone massage and a cocktail at the end of the day, doesn't it?
I guess
Normal 2v2.
I remember a specific scrim with Forgiven where enemy jungle was Nuno and he just literally came bot lane and just was giving buffs to enemy AD carry and just actually lane 2v3. I think that's where the phrase came from.
Right. The classic 2v3.
Dude, nowadays in like modern League of Legends, even like, well, I wouldn't say the best players, but in NA, like top tier teams like Team Liquid, they don't play for turret plating unless it's 100% sure and they know Xmith's on that side. What they do is they make sure they have good wave control, bounce the wave, and take the free recall instead of trying to hit turret. Because the risk of dying, you just lose so much. Like when you're winning lane, like you have so much control, but the risk versus reward of hitting turret when the jungle can potentially be there is just extremely high. So yeah, it's crazy to think about like people playing that way. It's just one mistake, you lose all your lead. It is so high risk and the reward is so low, and like you have to be up there the whole time to get the most out of that.
I mean, the game has progressed a lot since then, right? I don't think that playstyle is possible without good team coordination. If you watch RNG, it's not like Uzi just outperforming everyone. It's just his team actually plays heavily around him, and if they didn't, then he wouldn't be able to get these leads every game. So for sure, you cannot do that anymore. You cannot like solo carry a game. You cannot just play versus enemy jungle 2v3. I mean, I'm sure if Forgiven was playing, he would still push to that, but I'm sure he would include his jungle as well, because that's something that teams learn how to do. Like if you play without your jungler, you're trolling these days. Like you cannot play bot lane or mid lane or top lane, any lane pretty much without the jungler. It's something you need to learn, and no one knew that back then, or not in our team at least.
Like being as you came from the era when this is like obviously before Forgiven was like a super famous player, and it's later teams that actually a lot of the stories come out of where people like complained about him as a teammate. Like I know in your team there certainly were some complaints. Like I think Youngbuck didn't get along with him at times because obviously Forgiven was flaming him hard for not being high in solo queue and shit like that. Like in your team, did you yourself made it sound like it wasn't easy to deal with? So did you personally actually get along with him on a personal level?
Yeah, we did. After the adjustment period, which was a month or so, I think we pushed each other to become better. Like, and even though Yambak maybe, I mean, I don't know how his relationship with Yambak is, but during the time, I think it was completely fine. And he was. Wait, sorry, my screen just turned off.
Sorry, it just happens every 10 minutes if you don't move the mouse.
I'll take care of it. So at the time, there was a vote. We were deciding before the split started whether to kick Forgiven or keep him.
There was a vote.
And Yambak was like the guy who decided to keep him and push for it.
Oh, that's cool.
So I don't think that their relationship was bad, but obviously if a split doesn't end well, then people just remember the worst, right? So
sure.
How did you vote Unlimited in that vote into kick Forgiven?
Yes.
Yeah, at that time I voted yes. It was in the adjustment period. Okay. I'm guilty of that, but Forgiven forgave me afterwards.
Yeah, it was obvious. Think about it, Loco. He's only played one split, and he came from Rekkles before. Who literally at that point in time is like, think of Harry Potter, the first movie. That's Rekkles. Like he's a young fucking child who's just like, I think I can do this. Like, he's not going to be talking shit, is he? And then in comes some guy who already looks like he's 38 years. You know. Forgiven and Sacre come in and make you think like, oh, 40-year-old players playing the fucking LEC. It's unbelievable, isn't it? Like, these guys look like they've got a wife, fucking 2 mortgages, and 3 kids. One of them's from a past relationship. Fucking hell, no wonder they're so eager to win their lane. They're like, listen, I can't give up my lane. I can't give up this wave or my fucking kids go hungry, motherfucker.
Why do you have to bring Sacre into this?
Yeah, listen, he looks a bit like him, to be fair. He has a bit of that. No, and the other thing to say as well is this. The reason why that's an interesting story, Loco, is because it just shows you how intense a person Forgiven is. Because you have to realise the context of this is way worse than any of his other teams. Copenhagen Wolves, like I said, was kind of like a mixed squad of like okay players they picked up in Challenger. Forgiven was the talent of the team. He was literally considered already after that split like a contender for best ADC in all of Europe. Mm-hmm. So the idea that like with the one guy who's hard carrying your whole team, that everyone in the team goes like, actually, let's kick him. It's like if you ever play CS:GO, like you can be winning the game, but if you're a massive arsehole on comms, people sometimes do just kick you from the game, even if you're carrying. Like if you just abuse him too much. Mm-hmm. The thing is though, Unlimited, I would have thought you'd have gotten along with him better because like, let's face it, your background isn't like some of the... Like, when I've heard Svenskeren had problems with it, it doesn't surprise me, mate. Svenskeren's a pretty quiet guy. He comes from fucking Denmark. You've seen what a load of those guys... They live a lovely life. They live in a fucking Nordic utopia. You come from Bulgaria, mate. You're fucking part of the stuff, right? You should be used to someone screaming in your face.
Before he talks about... Before that part, one thing I do want to say regarding Forgiven is... You know how people always compare him to Steve Jobs because they, like, look similar? You know, when you talk about like someone getting kicked because they're like so intense and so like driven about their craft, like that reminds me of like Steve Jobs. And like when you guys tell me stories about, oh, he was like so mean about this, like he needed to have things this way and it was his way or like the highway, like that is exactly Steve Jobs.
What's great is that's actually a pretty good anecdote / analogy. Analogy. It's just that could absolutely have waited 30 seconds till he answered the question I just asked him, and then it would have been a great follow-on. So I don't know why you would just say, okay, wait right there.
It's fine. I can answer the question now.
Are you fucking Kanye West or something? Can we actually just finish this award and then maybe you can do an interview with me?
Get my bet on the minute.
So what I want to say that I think I had a pretty big ego. Even though I was a quiet guy, I didn't really want to be told that I'm playing the game wrong or that like someone is better than me. So I just didn't take criticism well. So I think a big part of it was just my own character, which I think I became better at during the years.
Right, onto your analogy there, Loco. I actually, by the way, know quite a lot about Steve Jobs. I've watched a lot of his interviews. I've read that massive fucking... I'd recommend it, by the way.
The black and white book, right? Yeah, I read that.
And what people won't know, though, which is why it's not a bad analogy, is the interesting thing about Steve Jobs is because he was so intense with how he would manage people within his company, right? This is very interesting because the same actual phenomenon happened to him that happened to other people. When you're working under Steve Jobs, it's a nightmare because he's like pushing you all the time. He's even literally doing stuff like demanding things of you you don't even think you can do. You're like, oh, I can't get it done by the end of the week. And he's like, we have to get it done by Wednesday. And you're like, what the fuck? No, and he's like, well, you better just stay up all night then. And at the time, right, you're going to think, what a fucking asshole. But I tell you what's interesting. When he left, and especially now that he's dead, loads of people who used to work with him are like, yeah, he was an arsehole and he was too demanding and sometimes he went too far, but it was the best time of my entire career and I'll never regret working with him because it was actually like, he in some ways, because he pushed me, it made us accomplish things we couldn't have accomplished. And so what's weird is that reveals a dynamic that I have always said about people like Forgiven, Dardoch, players that are considered toxic, right? Which is idiots would think they're just totally selfish. They don't care about anyone. That's why they say the things they do. No, they say the things they do because they really actually have a too high an expectation of their teammates. They think all of their teammates can play the game like, won't say perfectly. I'll just say like they can to their level. Like they think to themselves, look, I told you what to do before. Like just do it this way, like I said. So actually, they're if anything, they're sort of like, this is something I often say about myself, right? Only privately, to be fair, is I'm actually not a pessimistic person at all. Like if you look at my life, if I was pessimistic, you'd never heard of me, mate. I would have never even got out of the place I was from. I'm someone where the reason I'm quite often angry or negative is because I'm a failed optimist. I actually have massive optimism and believe people can do better than they can. So when they let me down again or they disappoint me, they don't do better things, I get pissed off at that. And unfortunately, luckily I'm an older person now, so it's not a big problem. But I used to have, by the way, I totally relate to players like that because I used to be like that when I used to play as a young guy. Like I used to be the in-game leader of all my CS teams. And my problem was I would have players that were just average players, but I'd be telling them like, listen, do this next time, like it'll work. And then when they wouldn't pull it off, it would just frustrate me so much. And at the time, I didn't know how to communicate that. Like one thing I didn't understand was being the leader isn't just giving the commands. It's also like knowing how to work with different people, like who can take it and who can't. Or sometimes even some of the things I've learned from the coaching world is you can actually trick someone to doing something where you can make it so that it encourages them to think it's their idea or they want to do that. That's actually that's way more effective than
what they say about coaches is them to do it. That when the best coaches is done with his job, the players feel like they did everything themselves.
There you go. Yes.
Damn, I thought what he was going to say.
That's the philosophy. Yeah.
Don't you can't play, coach, and don't you can't coach, make content. That's what they say about coaches. No.
I know what you mean, but you mean the classic thing that's like if those who can't do teach is the famous saying. Problem with that is I never really thought that angle made sense, but whatever. The problem with that is what they really mean, Loco. That's actually a flawed phrase because like obviously there's brilliant people who can teach you. What they really mean is become an academic teacher and not have like a real world job where you have any results that matter. So I kind of agree with that to some degree. Right? What about this then? Maybe just do a little bit about Freeze and then we'll get into actually now and coaching and SK Gaming and LEC. What about Freeze then? Because the interesting thing for me is I actually think Freeze is one of the most underrated players, at least by like community perception, like Reddit and stuff like that. Because the only times he ever actually got credit from the community was the Copenhagen Wolves team you were playing in because he was in the same position Forgiven was basically. Like he had to hard carry loads of the games. He was clearly the best player. And at the time he was one of the best ADCs in Europe. Then he got some credit when he was in NA on the Renegades team, just because Renegades was so bad. He was like the only win condition. Like, if you remember, if they ever could, they had to literally like lock Draven even when it wasn't meta, and he would have to like flash fucking ignite people level 1 or something mental, you know, like that's like the level. So as a result, he got credit basically only on the bad teams. His problem is, and I do vaguely agree with this, when he got his chances on the bigger teams, oftentimes it was just like a bit underwhelming, or it just didn't work out and he didn't get the results he wanted. So who was Freeze when you were playing? Because like I said, this is actually one of the periods people would probably point to as like one of the highlights of his career.
I mean, I think he was something in between of Rekkles and Forgiven. He wasn't as demanding as Forgiven. He was a bit more chill. And he would be more democratic about his lane. You know, he would ask for your opinion and think like, how can we do this better? Instead of like pushing what he thinks is a better play. I mean, honestly, I think the best thing about Freeze was his champion pool at the time. He was one of the few players who played Kalista and Draven, and that made him a huge threat for anyone.
Of course.
I'm really surprised that Forgiven didn't pick up on these champions because they're exactly his style, you know?
Sadly, I can tell you the story. I've mentioned it before. It's not an interesting one. Basically, everyone who knew him told him the whole time, just play it like. And then he used to tell me stupid shit like, you can't carry properly with it. And I was just sending him Uzi I VODs, Deft VODs from China. He's going, no, but you have to understand, like, the way that one of their teammates does this makes it work. And I'm like, all right then. And then eventually, when it just was proven that like loads of players played it, he was like, no, this is how fucked up his mind is, right? He goes, right, okay, I agree, you should play it. But if everyone can play it like you're showing me, then Riot's just going to nerf it. So what's the point in practice? Like, right, can't be that sort of fucking logic, can I? Like, I guess I'm out. You win. Like, you know. By the way, that's why
he's good at arguing.
He's amazing at arguing, actually, isn't he? I always tell Loco this, actually. The people who actually think Forgiven is just an idiot, right? I've never talked to him because he's actually incredible at explaining why he thinks a certain way. And I've even said to them, he's so good at it. This is why actually the Steve Jobs analogy is not bad either. Eventually, no, it's worse than that. What happens is, even if you don't actually think he's right, like if someone paused like a VOD review and said, you're not actually thinking what he's saying here is right, you'd be like, nah, I kind of disagree. But in the moment, he builds up like a logic cycle that you actually, when you come out of it, you're thinking like, yeah, he was right, actually. It's only like 10 minutes later. Wait a minute, I don't agree with that at all. What? It's like, but you get caught in his logic. You know, he's thought it through, basically. But anyway, the interesting thing as well, Loco, is here's an interesting detail people don't know about Forgiven and Freeze. The way you know all of the teams that kicked and didn't like Forgiven. So 3 teams kicked him. Copenhagen Wolves, SK Gaming, H2K. All kicked Forgiven, right? What you don't know is this. After Copenhagen Wolves kicked Forgiven, they recruited Freeze. After SK kicked Forgiven, they tried to recruit Freeze. And after H2K kicked Forgiven, they recruited Freeze. Do you know what that tells us, Loco? They love this fucking game. They just couldn't handle the personality. Because they got the guy who's like, it's like saying, it's like if I had a girlfriend, she has a super fine ass, like some, oh god damn, the shit's just sizzling off the fucking camera. There's condensation on that shit. Just even looking at it, right? But she's a total bitch. Like she's just nagging all the time. You know, it's like afterwards, if I was like, I want to go with a badonka like that, but not the personality. And then I try and get someone just similar enough. You know, that's like the fucked up mentality these teams were operating on, as far as I can tell.
I love how Unlimited described Freeze. He's like, well, he's a little bit between Forgiven and Rekkles. And then when he said that in my head, I was thinking, well, Forgiven's a fucking psycho, and Rekkles is really passive and lets everything go. So everyone is going to be between those two players. I'm like, that doesn't add anything to the conversation.
For sure, but I think Tori's analogy is the best. Like, we would look to recruit someone who can carry hard, right?
Yeah.
And we are aware he might have some personality issues, but we're
not on the level of Forgiven.
Sure. Because the interesting thing, actually, I agree with you, by the way. That was actually one of the reasons. What's funny is that would actually be my main knock on Freeze, actually, is that, believe it or not, despite his skill set, weirdly, he could be a guy who actually had like a lot of self-doubt at times, or he wasn't as sure of what he wanted to do in some ways, you know. So I always thought that was part of his problem, I'm afraid. I don't know what you think, but I do think if you want to be like the star player, you have to have a certain mentality. Yeah, you have to really believe you're the best. And because the other problem is, it's like if you can't convince yourself, how are you going to convince your teammate to help you do what you want to do, you know?
No, that's true. You know, fun trivia about Forgiven is that he thought he was the best when he was playing like Greek tournaments. Like he already thought he was the best in the world, so he was already there.
We should do an episode sometime, by the way, where I just bring on people and tell you stories about Forgiven, because I could make some amazing content. I'll give you one story, right? So when there was some tournament, I think it was like the IEM tournament in Katowice in 2014 or something, or maybe it must have been Let me think what year. I think 2014, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, fuck, I can't remember what year we're talking about. It must be 2014 because this is when.
Was it when TSM won?
No. So listen, the story goes like this. Whichever one of these tournaments he was at, I don't think he was actually at the tournament. They were just in Europe, but because it was in Europe, the tournament, all these foreign teams came in. And at the time, actually, unless I'm mistaken, I believe actually World Elite was there. And this was a World playing. So what happened is, right, in online scrims or like, I think it was scrims, in an online scrim against European players, Forgiven was playing, right? And then he just comes to me one day and he's like writing to me on Skype or whatever. And he was like, bro, I told you I'm fucking best player in the world. I am shitting on Wei Xiao. He doesn't even know who I am, man. He says, I am playing up in lane. He goes for CS. He hits me in his face. He doesn't know. He's never faced this kind of pressure before. It's like, I was going, fucking hell. It's in an unofficial scrim. What are you talking? But he really believed that shit. And by the way, I've told people this story before. One of the reasons, by the way, why two players I have always had unlimited respect for, pun intended, is Forgiven and Froggen, is because, like I say, Loco, they aren't joking, by the way. It's not something they just say in public. They are the players who believe they could smash the gods of the Korea. So, for example, I've told you this story before. No, the point, mate, imagine saying that to Caps last year. Oh, you could never beat the best Korean players. Well, he'd never have done what he'd done, would he? He would have never even tried those moves. He just went and fucking won a best of 5 against SKT, mate.
Caps is an exception. Caps is like 1 in a million.
No, right, that's unlimited. Obviously, you're biased to some degree because you did play with Forgiven.
Sure.
Do you think Caps is something like above and beyond what Forgiven is? Like Caps is a 1 in a generation. Forgiven is just a great ADC. What do you think?
I mean, I don't think I can compare them. They're both exceptional in their own way, but I don't think Caps has the intensity of Forgiven, like the solo carry mentality, but he has a certain freedom to his playstyle where he's just not afraid to make plays and doesn't care like if something goes wrong, he's gonna keep making plays until it succeeds.
Sure.
Which is what allows him to actually play versus the best players in the world, right?
I'll even throw in as well, in one sense, Caps is worse than Forgiven because Forgiven has a way more consistent game and style than Caps does. Like, Caps will absolutely ink away entire games and then afterwards clearly not learn from it because he'll do it again. Now, that's also because sometimes it can work because of his style of play, but I actually think that someone like Caps needs a whole fucking super team around him. I think he would be way worse on a lesser team. The difference is, you put a freeze on Forgiven on a bad team, they will absolutely hard carry the whole game. Like, every game they can do it. So anyway, my point I was trying to make
let me touch a little bit on the Forgiven versus Cap stuff. So I agree with you. Forgiven is like generational level of talent. I remember that split. It was like the Graves, Lucian, and there was like one more champ he played. Was it Caitlyn?
Probably Caitlyn, yeah.
Graves,
it has to be Caitlyn.
Like that split, like watching Forgiven, like he was fucking insane and he was doing stuff that no one in the West was doing and it was comparable to the Eastern ADs. Like you can have generational level of talent, but if you don't have the discipline, if you don't expand your champion pool, if you can't work with other people, like you can't be as special as Caps. Like maybe Caps has less talent than Forgiven, but he's making way more of it and Caps is way more special of a player because of that.
I don't know about that because a lot of that's like personal stuff you're talking about outside the game. Like this is basically Loco. What happened when we had that argument when we did Thorin versus Loco about Expeke versus Froggen? You kept making all these like external out of the game comments like Expeke gets people to play with him because he's a better. Like I agree with you on all those issues. The problem is as a player that means nothing, mate. Like as a literal player, I'm talking about in the server. You know, like I would agree as a person, he's a flawed person. Obviously, that goes out saying for Forgiven. I'm talking about if you put them in the server and you had no clue, you took all the nameplates off, you took away the context of the team. You even took away the results and just looked at the raw game footage. Forgiven is one of the best players I've ever seen play League of Legends, period.
Yes,
I'm not talking just
but in a very limited sense, yes. In a very limited champion pool, in a very like limited, like, can he do this?
Look at the world he came up in. The first teams he played for had mega flaw. All I'll say is this, right? I've made the point before. 2 things quickly about Forgiven. One, go and look at every team that he was kicked from. They all got way worse right afterwards. Most of them never recovered ever. Second, in fact, I think it's true. None of them ever recovered. Secondly, you go and you look at the teammates he had on these teams. He made some of these teams, like he took the Copenhagen Wolves team, which should have been, by the way, bottom of the league, made them a playoff team, almost got them into the top 4. He took the SK team, which was like, I'm not even joking, mate. None of these players are in the fucking league. None of them play League of Legends professionally anymore. Half of them are coaches. Some of them even role swapped. He took those players and he had them top of the league and he was the MVP of the split. Playing against, by the way, mega lineups from Like that was the year that Fnatic had fucking Hooney and Rain over it. They didn't have Rekkles, but
they had still
really sick. Yeah, they still had some sick players elsewhere on the map, though. Like very good. Origin obviously wasn't in the league yet, but they were around. Like the point is, if you were in that world, it's like, how are you going to trust teammates? How are you going to, like, it's like the analogy I always give is this. The moment that I never understood when they used to criticize one of my favorite basketball players, Kobe Bryant, right, was they used to criticize him the hardest when his teams were doing the worst, right? Because everyone uses the logic, like, if you were the MVP, your team would be winning. Right? The team that he took to the playoffs in 2006 had no business even being vaguely there. So what's funny is he used to say, like, so I'm a bad teammate if I don't pass the ball to someone who's going to miss the shot when I could make the shot with a defender on me. Like that, to win the game, that doesn't make sense. Like that's actually irresponsible as the carry of the team. Now, if you're in a different team, I totally agree, Loco. Forgiven's problem, in my opinion, maybe we'll make this quick and Unlimited can give us his thoughts. I think, unfortunately, first of all, look at his background. He isn't a young guy. He's not a 17-year-old guy.
He's old as me. He's 27.
Yeah, that's my point. He was already old when he started playing LCS, comparative to most pros. He'd come up from nowhere. By the way, you do know in the history of esports, Greece is pretty much irrelevant. To this day, the only teams I know that have ever done anything is Forgiven did some shit, and there was a team once in Dota fluked like a top 2 finish. That's it. No one's else ever done anything because the internet's terrible. They have no esports infrastructure. Because you're from Greece, you have a weird accent, so even speaking English is harder. Anyone who watched the fucking Summer Insight know. Me and Monty know Forgiven, and we were just going like, fucking, is this Universal Translator in Star Trek Office? The fuck is he talking about? Like, you know, like it's actually hard. And then you add in, I won't go into his whole personal life, but he's a guy who didn't have the easiest fucking life in the world and has kind of like a hard mentality to the world as a result. Meanwhile, we're comparing him to players, Rekkles, Caps. They literally grow up in fucking la 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 la, like some fucking village in Denmark, and everyone's like, they're just skipping along fucking daisies all out of a basket. La la la. Oh, look, I'm frolicking with the goats in the field. Yeah. Meanwhile, Forgiven's out there like a fucking Spartan with a knife in his fucking mouth when he's 5 years old. Get this motherfucker out! Just killing a fucking wolf, stabbing it in its eye with his own bone. He had to snap off his leg and fuck this. And then, he won that 1v2 as well, killed the whole wolf pack. So anyway, my point is, he came up different, didn't he? Not what I'm saying, Loco. Essentially, I'll take it rap for your son. Rekkles and Caps ain't about that life. Forgiven came up on the motherfucking streets. And that's why when he came up, what was his end goal? What, to live a beautiful life in the suburbs, in a gated community? No, it was to fucking run the streets. He wanted to be the mob boss, Don Corleone of them all, motherfucker.
Okay.
Don DeMarco.
That might not be a true story with the Wolves, but the general idea is correct.
Yeah, the gist was there. You know, you got what I was trying to get to there. Anyway, let's skip forwards. Let's actually talk about LEC, shall we?
All right.
So first of all, one thing I want to ask you was, as I referenced before, because SK has been very up and down, obviously mainly down in the LEC this year, one of the changes has been you've been through a bunch of coaching staff. So, like, can you give us a brief scenario of how did you come to be the head coach of SK? What do you think your strengths are as a coach?
To be fair, I'm assistant coach.
Oh, fair enough.
I'm not sure if I should call realistic to get on the show right now.
That's all right. To be fair, a lot of people weren't aware that SK had coaches, so, you know.
Fair enough. So
we'll get into that. Keep going.
Should I talk about my strengths as a coach?
Yeah. What do you like as a coach? Because I'm always interested, actually. Like, I personally think if you look at the best analyst experts and coaches in the scene, a lot of them with the supports in AD carry and junglers for obvious reasons. Like, they have to have map awareness, they have to know how to work with people, you have to persuade someone to work with you. It's like, I think it's the role that just logically makes sense to become a coach from. So obviously you were a support player for many years. What do you think as a coach your strengths are?
I think one of the things is that I see the best in people. So instead of focusing on their flaws, which can be many in esports community, right? I'm trying to focus on one or two things that they do the best. So as a coach, I'm trying to find a playstyle or way to use their strength rather than focusing on their weaknesses. I mean, it's not something I think about too much.
Actually, one thing you mentioned there I thought was quite interesting, which is that is probably, I think, the hardest part about coaching, which is why, actually, believe it or not, when everyone has a little laugh, like, before, when I tell people I could have been the coach of Fnatic in 2015, everyone laughs, right? Because they go, you don't know anything about the game. I tell you what, I would have been a 10 times better coach than Locodoco. And I'm not shitting on him there. Because I tell you what, here's the thing. If you were asking for the role of analyst, I would have no chance to beat Locodoco. He would destroy me. I don't know enough about the game. But the point is, I wouldn't have been the analyst. I would have been the head coach. And so some things I understood from my many years in esports and life is concepts that is like the head coach role isn't about implementing the strategy. That's what the others come up with. Head coach is about things like how do you work with people? How do you set up systems of communication? How do you actually make like a hierarchy within the team? How do you make people feel appreciated at all points in the hierarchy? So the person who has to give something up, you have to make them feel like they really have to get in something. These are concepts that were way ahead of the time back then, Loco. People know them now. Back then they didn't. And so I would actually say this is an interesting point. I actually think esports players and on the mental side are harder to coach than any sport that exists. Because in every sport I'm aware of, from the time in football in Europe, by the way, it's even more extreme. If you're a good footballer and you have any talent, probably from 9 years old,
you've been
coached by people who have like probably some level of it. Like your coach in school probably was like a regional coach. That's how far he got as a player or coach. And then your coach at the next level, at the national level, is probably a guy who was a real pro coach. And then when you get to the pro level, you've already been through the system. You already know what it's like to be coached. And crucially, because football is more of a social activity, you had a social life on the side. You're also, whatever age you are in real sports, let's say you're 20, you're comparable to a 20-year-old that's just a 20-year-old. There's the problem. Those two aspects in esports don't exist. Everyone who becomes a pro, except if they've come up through the challenger system, if they just become a pro out of solo queue, they've basically never been coached. They might even have never had the basic concepts of coaching. In fact, because they're nerds and they might not have played a sport, they literally might have never been coached in their whole life. They might have just spent their life as a kid growing up, having a vaguely normal life, and then they hit 14, they find League of Legends, and their life from that point on is inside EU West. That's what they're doing for the next 5 years. And then you get them all of a sudden, and you're supposed to be able to get this guy to communicate and understand this guy's not as good. Like, these are alien concepts. And then the other part to say is because they start so young when they're players, and gaming inherently, in contrast to traditional sports, is not as social. Like when you finish a football match, this will sound weird, Loco, but there's a tradition in English football back in the day that when you finished the football match, you would all get in a jacuzzi bath together. But everyone in because the idea was you're all men, like you're not worried about like what someone's thinking of you. You're all like super macho guys. But the point is, it's a mega social thing. You'd all go drinking afterwards. You're all mates and stuff. You have to travel on the bus to get to the game, etc. So there's actually a very social aspect. And obviously it goes without saying, big sports like football, you have tons of women lining up to see you. Well, in gaming, everyone who grew up playing the games, like, because they spent so much time in the gaming world and in the game itself, I don't even say it as a diss. A lot of them are just kind of like emotionally immature. They haven't had the life experiences that would make you be 22 and actually feel like a 22-year-old. They could be 22 and inside be like a 16-year-old because they kind of put their real life on pause and started trying to make this game the best thing. And then you add in, it's a team full of those people. Well, in a traditional football team, you have some older players, and they might not even be good anymore, but their job's to be a veteran and show you how to do it. And then you have the guy in the middle who's just playing for his career, but as a result, he's just going to do what the coach said. Like, you have such a different makeup that the reason I'm bringing this point up is because I have a lot of sympathy for coaches in esports because we're basically learning all this shit on the fly. Like, I actually believe, by the way, no joke, even if you brought in the best ever coaches from sports, like say you brought in Greg Popovich and Bill Belichick, I think they would fail in esports. And the reason why they would fail is because they've never actually dealt with this type of person. Like they've had the finished product. They've had someone who's an adult. They've had someone who's spent their whole life
Who would you bring
in the real world.
From what career field would you bring them in that is not esports? That they would have the most success in terms of coaching esport players?
Psychology.
Yeah, believe it or not, it's actually like the Weldon Green one. What people don't know about Weldon is this, because people never listen to what I say, Loco. So I learned long ago, they don't listen to what you say, but they listen to like the snappy moments. So all the snappy moments is like, you fucking shit or whatever. I always said, my biggest problem is, first of all, he's one of the first people from that field. Do you imagine he was the best in his field? He could have been the worst in his field. We wouldn't know. He just came in and said he was in. Half of us, by the way, didn't find out until 3 years later. He wasn't even a psychologist. That's why he has to specifically say a sports psychology trainer, because he is not legally allowed to call himself a sports psychologist. He doesn't have the qualifications for it. So my point with that, without getting into the whole thing, is like it's like saying, well, who's going to fix this, all these plumbing problems in this massive tanker? Just get a plumber. Oh, I've got the worst plumber in the world. What, you're saying he's not going to do a good job? Well, no, I wanted a good plumber, you fuck. Or at least like middle plumber. So you get the premise, like all people in every field aren't unique. So actually, jokes aside, I agree with him. I would actually have as my head coach, or as a very minimum, I'd have an assistant coach who is literally from a psychology background here. And it wouldn't even have to necessarily be sports psychology, by the way, because obviously a lot of that stuff like mentality to compete and stuff. I might even have a real psychologist who just works with people who have problems and just have people basically use him to like vent or fix communication problems between two people. I think that would actually be really interesting. What do you think, Unlimited? It's something you suggested, so I'm guessing you have thoughts along these lines?
I mean, I completely agree with you because for me, the favorite part about coaching is actually like creating new in-game concepts, like being creative with strategies, But you cannot get to this stuff until you actually fix a player's mentality. So you have to go through a couple of months of working on mentality before you can work on League of Legends. So obviously having someone proficient with psychology would be really handy because obviously I'm trying to do my best with what I know, but I'm not trained for it. I'm just learning on the fly, as you said. So I have some ideas that I gathered from here and there how to help the players, but I don't know what works for sure, and I don't really want to gamble with their lives,
Sure.
So I just give advices and try to help them vent their frustration, but I don't know how to fix like the deeper issues that any of them can have.
Like, put it this way, Loco. Obviously, this would already apply anyway if you heard what I'm about to say. But I mean in this context of like how you deal with people psychologically. Just as an adult and someone who's been through your life experiences now, if I could take you in a time machine and take you back to join TSM for the first time, but you don't get to know the results. Like, you can't cheat and just make like a specific draft. All you get is like the experiences of the concept of like how to deal with this person. Wouldn't you be such a better coach?
Yeah, of course. I mean, if you're old, you're basically asking a coach, if you have more experience, would you be a better coach? Of course you'd be a better coach with more experience.
He doesn't listen to me, did he, Unlimited? Like,
okay, so you mean in terms of like a life experience and having like
dealing with people.
Yeah, my point is basically you yourself didn't know how to deal with people back then. So my point is the psychologist would come in with that skill set. That's the point. I was trying to give you an analogy to show that if you'd have joined with the same game knowledge, like it's not like you get advanced game, but you just had that skill set, you might have had, I mean, you already had very good results, but you might have had even better results.
Maybe we would have won that world. Okay, on a serious note, yeah, I mean, after working with various players, like working with certain players changes you. Working with Bjergsen changed me. Working with Dardoch changed me. Working with Phoenix changed me, and it makes you more patient as a person, and you realize like to really work with certain players, like you have to be more experienced, like you have to be the bigger man, and you have to understand things from their perspective to really get through them and to talk to them on a real level. So yes, like having those experiences would allow me to deal with players better, even without having the one-to-one experience, because I know like you can't just expect, like kind of what you said out of Forgiven, like because I'm going to be logical, reasonable, I can't expect the same. Like when you have people younger than you, when you have people in different circumstances, when you have people dealing with different kind of pressure, they're going to react to things in a different way, and you have to go beyond to be able to reach them and to be able to earn their respect and to be able to coach them.
Like, I'll give you an example. I've actually used this analogy on the show before, but there's a great line that guy Jordan Peterson has, where what he says is the reason why you don't want to ever be in a relationship where you argue with your wife is because if you win, you lose as well, because now your wife hates you. So the point there is, I'm sure you can relate to this, Loco. That's one of the areas as well, by the way, where people don't understand what I was going to do if I was going to be the Fnatic coach. I would actually never be like I am on shows. I would never berate a player or fucking argue with him and tell him he's a piece of shit, because in that scenario, you might actually win the argument. You might even make a good point and beat him in that sense, but it will actually just ruin the relationship completely. Like, at that point, you know what young people are like. I mean, you should yourself relate to this. Is literally who you are. Say someone fucks you up in an argument and wrecks you and berates you. Like, even if they're right, even if the points they make are good, when you're young, part of you just thinks, fuck this guy. Like, I'll pretend I agree he's all right, but I'm just going to hate him forever. And any chance I get to fuck him over, I'm going to... But you do. That's just the way people feel, you know. It's the emotional reaction you get, right?
So, and that's an adult lesson. Like, when you become an adult, you stop proving people wrong. If you can get them to agree with you without they feel like they're wrong, like that's a very big skill to have. And like a lot of times, like when you're younger as a coach, as a player, you make it about who's right in the situation. Like, was it right for us to get Dragon priority here? Or like, was it wrong for us to fight for Dragon here? Like, and then the ultimate goal is like the team arriving at the right conclusion and the same conclusion, even be it the wrong one, so you can play cohesively. But people make it so much about right or wrong. And then like, that's what they die on.
Yeah, I think that's something I've improved on, at least recently. I've stopped trying to win the arguments, and whether I think I'm right or wrong doesn't really matter. Like after we both gave our points, I will just stop arguing about it. If he's right, then great. At least I made him think about the play. It doesn't matter whether I was right or wrong, right? Like just reviewing the play itself is already valuable for a player. He's using his brain. He's trying to understand. He's trying to understand why he's right. So I already won. You already won the argument just by asking the question. You don't need to continue any further.
Okay.
Wait,
if we start talking about Ellie,
let me add one more thing. That's where I think like Reaper is like really special as a coach. Like we talk about like Weldon getting coach of the split. Like one thing about Reaper, I feel like that gets undersaid is like the whole memes about Reaper being like 200 IQ, like Reaper being like, oh, this like god tier shot caller from SKT. Like Reaper as a player and Reaper in terms of knowledge, he was definitely on the smarter side, but I wouldn't say he's like far beyond exceptional. He was so smart as a player, and that's carrying over as a coach. Like one thing that makes Reaper really special is his charisma and like how he leaves C9. Like I think that's way more special than any of the game knowledge things he brings. And I think like that's what a lot of the coaches nowadays are lacking. They don't lack game knowledge. I think a lot of the coaches are really smart, and in the game knowledge aspect, that's not where the teams are failing. It's being able to lead the teams and like having that charisma.
I'd also throw in as well, just a piece of trivia for people who don't know, is if you look at Reaper's success, don't look at him and think, oh, that means all the good Koreans could come over and coach. Because Reaper as a Korean isn't like the others. Like some people like Kane are the like traditional Koreans. Like they're polite, they're respectful, they follow the hierarchy. Reaper already was kind of like an outsider type guy from the streets. He was kind of like, his way of talking, he was a very informal way, right? He's that sort of a guy. So I could see why he'd be like in football, we have the term Loco. It's called like players coach. It's like the idea
he's
is
definitely
like
a players coach. Whenever players describe Reaper, they're like, he's my friend. Like he's my coach, but he's also my friend. Where when Double and like other people that work with Kane describe Kane, they're like, he's my coach. They don't describe him as, oh, Kane's my friend. He's someone I would hang out with.
Sure. The only thing is, though, I will say that is the hardest way to coach, in my opinion. Like, it's only going to be a rare person and a rare group of players that will work with. Like, you're definitely going to have a lot of scenarios that probably wouldn't work with. And I actually think generally the Kane approach is probably the right one, to have a little bit of distance. Like, I'm your boss, you're my employee. Now, that shouldn't be like abusive, but, there should be like an understanding, like we're professionals. So I think that's just a rare thing to have. So I agree that's interesting.
I think when you come from a player, it's actually hard to keep that distance because you still feel like one of the guys. Yeah. That's something I was also feeling. I was trying to keep as much distance as possible, but it just feels impossible sometimes, Like I kind of get sucked into the atmosphere, like
I know exactly what you mean. Yeah, like
I think every ex-player coach feels the same way. You become one of the guys, no matter what.
Yeah, if I feel like that feeling goes away when you coach longer than you've been a player, or you become so old. Some of the stuff that players do, you're like kind of like, what the fuck. So
I mean, I start feeling disconnect from the players nowadays, but I can still understand them. I think more than I understand other coaches.
Right, okay, anyway, let's jump in LEC stuff then. So one of the interesting things is, for people who don't know, Unlimited joined this team basically, was that actually after the spring split? Was it the
it was at the beginning of summer. I actually joined 1st of June.
Yes, because before that he was actually coaching the XL team, so we can also talk about them at some point else later. But anyway, if we start with the SK team, for people who don't, the reason why I make that clear is because he wasn't there in spring. So even though in spring they actually had, like, obviously they made it in the playoffs in the end, they were a different team because obviously they had Whirlib at the time, and now they brought in Sacre from the it's called Prime, was the challenger name for the team, the National League team.
From the academy.
And then they also now have brought in obviously Gen X to replace Pyrian, so they used to also have Pyrian back then. So when they had the spring team, people know it was basically Selfmade had to hard carry the game. Pyrian was like decent, but like kind of played a bit on his own. And then I would say like the bot lane was actually probably underrated. Like I think people only now know some of them are good, but at the time people assumed, like, because obviously the interesting thing is nobody knew who Dreams was, even though he's a Korean player. Like I'd never heard of him at all. And then Crownshot, you only know him if you followed the challenger level from the last couple of years. So I don't think people actually had many expectations of this team. So actually it was kind of a shock that they made it as far as they did. But this is the question though, Unlimited, because the problem is when people saw that team, the most obvious player to Flames were Whirlib. I mean, he had a very limited champion pool, didn't look like a very good player to me. Didn't surprise me that like it seemed like a waste to gank for his lane sometimes. So if you saw on the SK Prime team, their main player was Sacre, and they would heavily play around him and give him his carry picks. Like the Jace is the obvious example. So when they brought Sacre into this team, on paper it looked like oh, this is awesome. Like, you've got like an underrated bot lane, you've got a guy in mid who's kind of a bit self-sufficient, you've got a carry jungler, and then you've got like a carry top lane. This should be amazing. Like, everyone who I saw on shows was saying like it's SK that should be the team that breaks into that group with the Splices, Fnatic, G2. You know, maybe they'll be below it, but they can be the ones going up. And obviously, it was the opposite. The guys went to the bottom of the league and he had a lot of problems initially. So can you just tell us that, bringing in some of the other players, what were the challenges trying to integrate these new players?
I mean, they also got me the split, you know, so I don't have the best reputation, but
okay.
Joking aside,
yeah.
in my expense, when you change players in the team, people don't understand how much the dynamic of a team changes. They just see the stats, they just see the outside perspective. Big part of the split I spent trying to understand what went wrong, obviously, since we were performing worse than the previous split, and everyone can agree that Sakura is a better individual player, right?
That's why it's confusing, right?
Yes. So at some point I was looking back at the replays, trying to find out what was different back then. And I mean, I found multiple things, but one of the things was, while Werlip was always behind the CS and he was mostly losing his lane, right? He was roaming mid more often, and he was giving up CS to move mid lane and apply pressure there. SK was not a team that played around their mid lane, so jungle would play for jungle leads and lanes would play by themselves for their own leads. And Werlip moving and giving up CS gave the pressure that allowed Piran to lane easier, right? And require less ganks and get out of the lane phase easier. Something that missed with Sakura, obviously, as a carry player in the team, he focuses on how to dominate his lane, how to snowball his own advantage, rather than translate his own advantage into the team. So I think this is a change that wasn't really noticed until it was already too late.
Makes sense.
By the time it was noticed, we tried to fix it, but there was already a negative snowball within the team. Like, we're already 0-6 by that time, so not 0-6, we're at 6-game losing streak, so
yes.
Getting people at the mentality that we can actually change and we can move forward was not easy. And the teams that we were playing, I believe, was like a G2 Fnatic, something like that. So, these were the hard weeks to actually get a win.
Because when I do my other show, the LEC entirely focused show I do with veteran elitist United, his theory he always brings up about SK, because he also thought his team was going to be really good, was that he said the thing he couldn't have predicted was that because you have to play to top when you have Sakura, I mean, why wouldn't you? Like, he's a fucking amazing laner. When you play to him like that, to him, he said that he thought the most underrated player on SK was Dreams, and that actually people didn't notice how good he was and what the impact he was having was, and that basically when you play away from them, then that lane struggled as well.
I mean, part of it is also that in the summer the teams just became better. That's like, it's a fact.
Better, certainly.
Every time spring is like, in the beginning it's whatever. Like, anyone can get wins. You don't even need to be good at the game. You know, as the split progresses, everyone becomes better to the playoffs. But summer is like completely different. Every team played better, and I think they knew the weakness of SK better. So especially the mid lane, not playing with the jungle, that's not something that can work on the highest level. They just focused that weakness and isolated Piran. And that also kind of led him to become isolated outside of the game as well, because he felt like he doesn't get the help that he needs. He also disconnected from the rest of his team, and it was harder to create synergy after that.
Were you guys killing it in the start of summer? Because I remember Cap saying SK is going to be top 3, SK is going to be top 4, like, they're so good. I remember him saying that on stream. Like, what was happening in the start of summer, like, that made teams think you guys were going to be so good? I
think not so many things were different. I think players were more confident, but the problems were already there in the playstyle. You could see the problems already, but we were winning because the other teams were not in shape yet. And SK was like, when I joined SK, they were already in shape. They knew how they want to play the game. They knew how to draft. They knew everything they need in order to win the first weeks. But as the league progressed, we didn't manage to solve any of the problems, but the other teams became better. That especially happened during the Rift Rivals break. I think that's most important, because you could see the difference. Like, teams like Schalke and Splice used this break and then came out and were completely different teams. They were dominating everyone. Even Excel, after they came out of the Rift Rivals break,
they immediately got good. Yeah,
I mean, they still took some adjustment period, I think. But the point is, I think we didn't use the break as well as other teams. We used it mostly to like we had too many free days, too many like chill days. We couldn't find too many good scrims either. So we actually didn't use the time that we should have used to become better. So every team jumped ahead of us. That's why the start was good, but then when every team became better, we didn't really become better. And that's how the losing streak started.
It's crazy though. Like that's the expectation of esports. Like think of a normal job, like you get a week break or you get a few days break. Like you're expected to recharge, like you're expected to go take a break. In esports, that's the expectations. When you get a break, this is time to practice. Like when Rift Rivals happens for the other teams, it's time to practice. And like,
I mean, I kind of blame Koreans for that. No offense.
I agree. No, mate, they are what brought that mentality. Because think about it, right? One of the real reasons why the TSM players, for example, have all that pressure on them every year is because they're expected to perform at Worlds, right? It's not about LCS. I mean, it is now, but it didn't used to be when they always won the LCS. The problem is, winning LCS, they still just got flamed for not doing well at Worlds, right? So what people used to say is like, they should practice all the hours the Koreans do. They should bring in a Korean coach. Like everyone had just their approach, just copy them. Well, the point is, in traditional sports, not only can you not practice that much in most cases, you get injured if you practice all the time, but like, because it's a physical sport, most people aren't going to go to the training ground on their day off and do extra training. Like you really are going to have time off. Like if people want to know how extreme the difference is, the absolute top level that you can ever get to in the NFL is to play in the Super Bowl. It's actually quite famous. Some teams, when they get to the Super Bowl, still party the days before the Super Bowl, like in the week building up, because it's kind of like a festival of football. People all go to the city. They're having all the like media stuff, and so there's people who go out partying and go clubbing who are going to play in the Super Bowl. Like to a Korean, they would be practicing like it's life and death if they're like trying to get into LCK. Never mind playing the fucking World's final. So like that just shows how. Sadly, it is skewed by Koreans in that respect. And obviously, part of the problem that we've had to learn over the years is we aren't Korean. So that approach doesn't work for people in the West anyway, in my opinion. In fact, I think what's interesting to me, as I've seen people coach both regions, LEC and LCS, is even the mentality between the two regions is different. Like I think you have to coach Europeans differently than Americans, as some people have absolutely found out the hard way and the easy way.
You know how we talk about TSM culture as toxic? TSM culture is very normal in Korea. Like being forced, like always having the expectation to win.
Yeah, but here's the thing, Loco. The sad thing is, this is one of the reasons I used to always tell people from the early days, because I knew about StarCraft Brood and how intense it was. I used to always tell people, you don't want this, because this is going to sound really dark, but there's a reason why the suicide rate in Korea is way higher than it should be for such a great country.
For such a modern country, we have extreme suicide rate, and also regarding like the StarCraft stuff, like StarCraft players had extreme vices, like gambling, and other stuff. I'm not gonna mention the other stuff.
Fixing.
Yeah, or not even beyond match fixing, or even before match fixing. Like
they like to take baths, but sort of in a public setting and with someone to help them down. That's all I'm going to tell you guys. That's all you're going to get to know. Think about what I just said. That's all. I've just told you everything.
Yeah,
right, keep going. Yeah.
Korean players had extreme vices to keep up with like the stress and like just the extreme environment in StarCraft. So yeah, I don't think like it's healthy, but yeah, that is kind of the culture and that's kind of the norm in Korea. Like, try hard every day or die trying, and it's not just for video games, it's just for like regular jobs too.
I mean, I think that's one of the bigger issues in esports, like dealing with stress, and that's why I think that psychologist is very, very useful in every team, and not like once a month meeting, not even once a week meeting, because imagine you spend 6 days a week like having shitty mentality and like pressuring yourself really hard, and you have one day where you release it. You're still gonna have a shitty life. Like you cannot live with one good day out of 7. Like there's no way.
That's actually the reason why. Another thing I always thought, like this, you can go back and look at my work. It's in there, Loco, back in 2015 or before. I always was against team houses because of exactly this reason. Is when I finish work, if I work a real job, let's say I have to do a shit job, I just work in a supermarket. I don't then go home and then sit in the same fucking living room with the guy who's working on the till next to me and my boss, and then go, I can never fucking get away from them. And then even then after that, I go to have my dinner, they're there as well, just sat there. That'd be a nightmare. No one would want to work in that environment. Well, the problem is in esports, you'd have that. So what I always used to say was good about esports in the traditional sense is what it's like in Counter-Strike. It's because you're at home. When the scrims end, you log off your computer. You're just a guy at home again, like you're with your family. You don't have that. It's like you can let off the stress naturally because you're already used to it in your own life, knowing how to chill out anymore. Whereas when you're in the alien environment of someone else's house, a team house, and all these expectations, you can never like there was a player in Overwatch just said it actually on my show with Monty, because their team actually still has a team house.
Yeah.
He said he feels like when he's in a team house, to some degree, it's like he's in public all the time. He's never like in his private space.
So in like 2014, 2015, like TSM days, like extreme, like especially when it was like really stressful, I would stay over at my friend's house. Like it would be like I would go over there like when we end practice, and it would be like 10. Like after everything's done, like the prep is done, like I would go over there at 10, and to make sure I'm on time, I would have to wake up somewhere around like 7 a.m. or 8 a.m. to make sure I can wake up and come back to the house. But it was still fucking worth it for me to not sleep at the house and not just be there, because it was just so stressful. And I was sharing rooms at the time. Like I was sharing a room with Dyrus, so there was no like moment in time where I felt like I was alone, and I felt like, oh man, like I'm not in like esport mode, I'm not in practice mode.
And the problem is, Dyrus used to snore, right?
Dyrus sleep talked, but for me and Dyrus,
listen to the story. So what the problem is, because he used to snore so much, Loco, like I don't know if you've ever had anyone who snores, but like you don't want to wake them up, actually, believe it or not, because it feels horrible. But at the same time, it's wrecking your sleep, right? So Loco used to just think, I tell you what, I'll get my own back. You're going to get 5% of the jungle ganks for the next 2 years. Fuck you. And then he never used to get it. He was like, why can't I play League of Legends? You were like, why can't I sleep, motherfucker? I need 8 hours a night. Give me a break. Anyway, let's go back to the LEC. Here's a question for you. So the most hyped player before Sakura joined was obviously Selfmade, because out of the Mad Lions team, which everyone wanted to see play in LEC. In fact, I actually think, as an aside, the great what if is what would have happened if someone took the whole team and brought in LEC. I'd have loved to have seen that. Would have been very interesting. So I think what we learned from them coming into LEC was they were a good team, but we didn't know which part did what and how they interacted, etc. So when you get Selfmade, what is this guy like as a jungler? Who is he?
I mean, he's a very honest person. He reminds a bit of Forgiven, but he's...
It's worth pointing out, by the way, because he's Polish, he's also going to be a lot more blunt than the Nordic Wonder Boys, as we call them.
Yeah, sure, but thing is, surprisingly, usually when you have these like honest and blunt people, they're not very good at taking criticism, but he actually accepts criticism and learns from it, you know. So it was really impressive. I had completely different idea before I joined, and I was really impressed by Oscar, Selfmade, once I joined the team. He pushes everyone to become better, but I guess he does it in a very subtle way that most people cannot really realize. But as a coach who observed from behind the scenes, like you can actually see, like he's gonna make some comments that might feel sarcastic to people, but he's actually trying to tell them like how can they improve their gameplay or how like they can improve their life. Like he's always actually trying to help the team become better.
So
I know what he meant by, listen, when he said how to improve their life, he just meant Loco, obviously, like a comment on the side. He doesn't just like play and then be like, I will come top in 2 minutes, and also, by the way, diversify your stock portfolio. You will go broke in the next financial crisis. So he didn't do that, obviously, you know.
No, but what I mean is he's gonna try to bring the team together. You know, he would suggest like, let's do team activities, let's do something as a team. He will try to like bond as a team, not only in game but out of game as well. That's something I can really respect.
So what you said reminds me very much about Dardoch, like being honest, like being willing to help other people and like help them improve. So a flaw that Dardoch had was like, despite having good intentions, due to the immaturity, sometimes like what he would say would not come out in a good way, even if with all the good intentions in terms of, hey, I want to improve how we play our mid and jungle duo. Hey, I want to improve how our support and jungle plays after we get our first sight stones, or how we do our first invade. Like it would just come out in such a rude manner that people won't be able to get it. So is that like a common problem with Selfmade? Because I see so much similarities when you tell me like, hey, he's very honest, he's very blunt, he wants the best out of people.
I think from what I hear, that might have been a bit of a problem last split, but this split, I don't think it's as much. I think it's something he's actively working on, and he's trying to communicate things in much more positive way. Yeah, I think him and most of the players in the team are all people who want to carry the game, and they don't want to let someone else do it. But that kind of creates a problem, right? Because you cannot have 5 carries in a team. I think Piran was the one who accepted like not not carrying. Like he accepted the role where like it's okay, I'll just take whatever I can take. Don't need to give resources to me. I'll just try to go 50-50 in lane and then come out and team fight. But the rest, they really, really want to carry. They have this fire. Like if they have a chance, then they would always pick a champion that will give them more urgency in the game and allow them to carry the game. But you cannot do it for everyone, so that's why I think we had a bit of identity crisis most of the split, because we were trying to switch different carries, we were trying to give different people chance to carry, but it's kind of hard to balance because you actually need to practice one style to become good at it, and we didn't practice any style, so we're like amorphous blob, like we're instead of everyone being a carry, no one was a carry.
If you think about it, it makes perfect sense, Unlimited, because when you have the team that they had in spring, it's very obvious. It's like when you had Forgiven on Copenhagen Wolves. Like, it's not going to be Youngbuck or Coutard who's the carry of the game, is it? Like, they're going to get their champions if they can, but otherwise Forgiven's going to carry. So, believe it or not, this will sound weird, but what could actually be good about having a not as good team is it's obvious who should do what job and how everyone should play. Like it's easy. Whereas
resource allocation, right?
The whole reason, in my opinion, like one of the main reasons that super teams fail is because you spend half the fucking time trying to figure out who should carry and what the hierarchy is and who gives up for what and when, and people think like you're saying now, it's my turn to carry, which is like that's not really the way a team works. There's a reason why great teams tend to have one or two star players, basically, kind of.
Yeah, I mean, you have limited resource in league, right? So it's kind of hard to have more than one or two
has
carries.
Unlimited resources, technically. But, anyway, I wanted to ask you something else, actually.
Yeah, sure.
Because, I actually maybe not ask him. I wanted to say something, though, which is that I've seen a lot of players playing League of Legends. Like, one thing, I can't say I understand the game on super deep level, but I've watched a lot of games. So I have a very good contrast in comparison. I have a pretty good memory as well. And if you notice, Loco, as much as people like to flame me on other stuff, I haven't put many feet wrong in terms of players I tout to be the next great player who then fail. Try and think in your mind, was I ever on the Mike Young hype train? No. Was I ever on the hype train of some of the players? I'll tell you who's a great example, actually, from one of Forgiven's teams. The second carry of that team should have been Svenskeren, but everyone used to tell me it was this mid laner called Fox from Sweden.
Oh, fuck.
And Jesus wasn't on that team at that time. And I used to tell people, this guy's mad overrated. Well, all you need to know is he has never been seen fucking since that year, mate. He's just gone off to nowhere.
Don't worry, we just called him a challenger.
So my point I'm making here, right, is generally I think I'm a pretty good scout, but I won't say for all levels of talent, just mainly for like the next great players. And actually, I was one of the people very early on the Jankos hype train. Believe it or not, episode 2 of Summoning Insight was actually us just looking at Roccat when they first came in the LCS. And I actually reviewed all their games, looked at them all individually, and I said, of this team, which I'll remind you what was his name? Zaxxas top. It was Jankos jungle. It was what was his name? Something Overpower mid. It was Sullivan AD carry, and it was Vander support. And I said on this show, the two players who are the players who will stay in the LCS and become great players are Jankos and Vander. You can go back and look. That was the second show I ever did.
I believe you.
I'm not even talking shit. So my point is, like, just as I saw when Jankos came in, like, holy fuck. Like, I remember seeing him, and I literally, my first thought was like, this is the next Diamond Prox. Like, if this guy gets on a good team, look at like how self-directed he is, how good he is mechanically. Like, his champions were all the aggressive gank. Like, he was not a guy who had any fear as a jungler. I have the same thing with Selfmade. Like, I actually think when you look at this player, this is like, I would be surprised if this doesn't end up being like an all-time great player in the LEC. As long as he gets onto some decent teams, he doesn't, and as he's saying here, it doesn't sound like he has the same personality conflict some other players have had that have held them back. Like, it's not, I won't go as far as some people and say, like, if you put him in Fnatic, he'd carry tomorrow, because I've never seen him with a team like Fnatic and teammates like that. But he actually absolutely has that potential, I think.
I mean, I think so too. I mean, maybe I'm biased, but I think most of SK players in isolation have a lot of potential, and all of them are actually young rookies, right? Even Sakura is a young rookie. Like, maybe he looks like 40, but he's actually
a young old rookie. Yeah, exactly. You're just as young as you feel, as he always says, and as he gets a lot of birthday cards saying.
So one bad split in LEC is not gonna define their career. They just started. They're gonna become like, they're gonna learn from this split a lot, and they're gonna become much better from it. And I think all of them have the potential, but you need to build a team that would play around them. I think with Selfmade, you would need, like, I don't know if putting him in Fnatic would work, because in Fnatic the jungler usually plays for the laners. I think putting him in a team where the laners play for the jungle would actually work. Laners that are more self-sufficient, and let him do his thing, because that's his playstyle. He's learned other playstyles as well, but it's taking time, right? Like learning a completely new playstyle in the jungle is always a nightmare. Good example is Pride Stalker. When he joined LCS, he was a really, really good carry player, right? But it wasn't a carry jungle meta anymore, so he had to learn how to play control, and it just took him forever to actually learn it, and then he was just mediocre at that. So I think what would make him self-made the best player would be have a team that plays around him, like it was last split. I think that's exactly how the team was winning last split. They were playing around self-made, and they were giving him resources, and they were winning games from that.
I mean,
But
as we talked about,
same
like
could be said for other players in the team as well.
as we talked about, like the meta is different, and depending on the meta, you might do well, you might not do well. How well balanced is self-made? I'm not sure the exact stat, but I think he has one game of Sejuani the entire split. I'm not sure if it was heavily banned from you guys. Like, how good is he when he's pushed off of like his carry champions? Like, he's shown like he has really great proficiency when he's playing these aggressive skirmishers. Like, how is he when he's pushed off those? Like, how is he when the meta is swapped?
I mean, Sejuani is actually one of his signature champions by itself, but the Sejuani playstyle is not the playstyle that he's proficient on, which is control, play for vision, play for the lanes, like give up jungle camps, you know. It's something that he's learning, and he's becoming better at it pretty quick, I would say, compared to other junglers that I've coached in the past. But it's still obviously like, feels like, you know, he's a cage beast. That's like you force him in a cage, and then he's just sitting there, you know. But if you can put him on a champion that he feels comfortable on, he can take over a game.
Okay.
Right, we'll talk about some of the other teams now, but there's one more player I want to ask about, actually, which is the player I referenced before, is Dreams. Because actually, obviously, people will know Crown Shot vaguely from the challenger scene, and he's actually a carry player, so he's had some pretty good games. But who is Dreams? Because like I said, to me, he was just an unknown Korean guy, and I remember thinking, who the fuck is this guy? So who is this player?
I mean, actually, I worked with Dreams for a very long time, so I know him pretty well. We've been working together for like 2.5 years now. And he's the main reason I joined this team, because I wanted to help him out. After Excel, I wasn't sure if I wanted to like jump on a new coaching job as fast, because that split was a bit rough. But knowing that I can like help as assistant coach and help Dreams have a good split, then that's the reason I chose SK as my next team. I mean, he's a very, very hardworking guy. Like he's basically League is his life. I mean, I guess that's true for most Koreans, right? Like he just lives League of Legends.
Life.
I think what makes him like a good teammate is like he's very goofy. That makes the environment in the team good. You know, like people make fun of him, like, but basically the environment becomes good in his expense because everyone is in a good mood.
Sure.
So he takes one for the team.
In terms of his style of play, I just like to watch him play. He's a good playmaker. I love supports that I go for aggro shit. They're not literally just only the traditional support, you know, from the old school.
Yeah, so he actually sacrificed himself in this team as well, because if it was up to him, he would be playing much more Pike or like Bard or like Blitzcrank, something that
He'd basically be Hillsang or something, right? He'd just be going all over the map doing whatever.
That's what he would like to be, right? But in the way that we play, in the way we draft, he cannot really go for his champions most of the time, because we're forced to reveal support early, which means you cannot like just blind pick Blitz or Bard, you know, like you need to wait for enemy to pick support, maybe the AD carry, you need to sacrifice other roles, but he just finds sacrificing himself for the team and just taking the worst matchup, which, if you ask me, makes him even better than he looks, because he's forced to, in bad matchups in bot lane and Crown Shot as well, like they just take bad matchups all the time just to make sure that the rest of the team can get like a better draft.
I mean, that's
and they play it out.
Go ahead.
Oh no.
I mean, that's the other resource that I feel like never gets talked about, like players blind picking. Like people talk about like, oh, this player gets like this much jungle games, this player gets like.
So I'll tell you who never blind picks. Can you guess?
Who never blind picks?
His name begins with B and he plays for TSM.
Oh.
Wait, we talked about this before, where Bjerg blinds a lot, and we wanted to counterpick more. Like, wait, don't get. We literally talked about this. Bjerg blinds way too much for TSM, and we'd rather see him counterpick. And all the
Now he
counterpick.
does.
What?
He used to be 24/7 counterpick, mate.
He was carrying the team doing 24/7
Anyway,
counterpick.
whatever. Keep going. You're just making it sound like it's an important aspect. So you keep going.
It is an important aspect, and that's like the god.
Yeah, I'm just saying
man.
it never factored in your mind for the last 5 years. But anyway, keep going. Glad you've learned that though. Well, welcome to the game. This is League of Legends
Oh my
coming in.
God, you're poking at TSM when they're wounded. They're wounded.
We're
They're
supposed
in
to
a
go out of
corner.
this shit when they're the best. No, I tell you what, Loco. This is a quick aside, but I
Yeah.
will say this: one aspect that is terrible about your personality, mate. Is
Yeah.
it's the same as TSM, by the way.
Oh,
It's none of-
sure. Then now you're gonna compare me to TSM, and this is why both TSM and Loco are bad. Okay, I see how it is. Go ahead.
And the problem is, when you're all winning, you love
Yeah.
to talk shit. You love to style on the opponent. You love to talk about how you're the best, but you can't take it when you lose. Now, here's the thing. I'm not saying be a good loser. Be like, I'm fine losing. But, like, if you're going to talk shit, you have to be able to take it.
Oh,
And
I
anyone
do
who
take
says,
it. I fucking write down every single fucking person that shit talked me when I lost, and then I have a list. And I'm just there sitting there quietly. I have a list, and then there's times I check off.
That's
people.
not really what we mean by taking it, you know? That's taking it to heart and being a little bitch and trying to, like...
It's not being a little
revenge
bitch. It's just
people.
having a list,
Like
and then
an
you check
anime.
off people.
This is not an anime, and you are not in a school harem right now.
I think you just made the list. Sorry.
I know.
Oh, he's the on the top of the list. Keep your
Anyway.
friends close, but your enemies closer twice a week.
Anyway, the point you were making was about the fact that if someone gives up resources essentially, they're willing to take a bad matchup. That is often not considered because you're right, Loco. Obviously, most people unfortunately still look at players individually, or they might even just look at a bot lane and say, "Well, look, this bot lane is being outperformed." Well, I'm going to go ahead and guess if you're taking bad matchups all day to give the rest of your team the picks, you're probably going to have way worse stats than the rest of the fucking bot lanes, and you're going to be in situations that in isolation you might look worse, but you're not.
Yeah, I mean, we compare stats so directly. Like, dude, this split stat comparison has been so fucking garbage. When people were comparing AD carry stats, and then, like, it shocked me, because even fucking, like, LCS analysts were doing it. When Azael, like, so it's a little bit ago, but it's something that irked me so much. Azael was comparing double-lip stats to Zben's stats from finals, where Zben was playing Sona multiple games, and he was talking about how much CS double-lip was up. And when people were talking about, oh, look at this player, like, look at his DPM, or look at how much CS he's up this season, I'm like, are you not gonna fucking check how much times they play Sona? Like, does this not account for it? Like, just stats like this split has
Loco,
been... What?
have you ever noticed I have never once ever quoted damage stats for Froggen? You know he always has among the best stats, right?
Of course, because he has no AD carry. Like,
That's the point. No, and he's also a team fighter anyway. He plays.
And also, like, the damage per minute stat is like, oh, look at this player. His damage per minute stat is insane. You know who's gonna have really shitty damage per minute stats? Teams that finish the game really early and you don't get to the late game where you have 4 to 5 items. If you drag on the game, of course your damage per minute stat is gonna be fucking insane. Like, stats are important, but stats need context, and people have been doing so much comparison without the context, like, way too much. Just oh
It's
my
because,
god.
unfortunately, I can tell you, it's producers who think that sort of shit's great. Like, even if they would used to tell me on E-League, even if you don't really want to use the stat I show on the screen, like, show it and just initially mention it, because they think, right, well, people can understand a number better. Whereas, like, as you're saying here, actually the number, I think, will confuse you more until you have the expert give you all the information. So, to me, let's just skip the fucking middleman and start with the experts giving you the information. Because if you see, like, a ranking and it shows me that, like, I'll give you an imaginary version from I'll use LEC. Let's say the ranking showed that in this, so we'll use his example. Let's say the bot lane of SK was way worse on the ranking than the bot lane of, let me think, what team I would say as a mad over it. But, well, an obvious example would have been the fucking Misfits one where they had the original team in, right? I don't think they would have that much a worse one, but I imagine actually, I remember they had good early laning stats in terms of gold. If you'd have said which one's the better bot lane, I would take the SK one all day. Because if you put the context in, it's all the relevant stuff. The stat itself is all the irrelevant stuff. Like, what happens when you don't know what champions they play, or you don't know the resources they get, you don't know the jungle path, you don't know anything, basically. And so you would actually get tricked. Your brain would go, well, if this is higher, you must sort of be better, right? No, maybe not at all.
I mean, I think good example would be Schalke. They're like heavy bot lane focus. They last pick.
Oh, of course.
AD
It's
carry
play for
many
you, yeah.
times. So they definitely give a lot of resource. So just comparing two teams without the context doesn't make any sense. Like, does someone think that that RNG top laner likes to be 50 CS down every game,
Sure.
and Uzi just magically got that just gets 50 CS up every game somehow. Obviously, they just allocate the resource in the team to make that happen, and someone has to take the fall, I guess.
Yeah.
What about this then? What I think makes this episode interesting is obviously, like, whenever we talk about LEC, like, I hope everyone knows that, like, the bias is obvious. Any viewers generally don't care about LEC. Loco is not like the hugest fan. Yeah, he watches it, but it's like it's clearly not his focus, you know. So as a result, when we talk about, I try to stick to the big teams basically because there's always interesting topics. They're winning games. They're showing great leagues. There's a lot to talk about. So normally we actually skip a lot of the lower teams. So I thought on this one we could also ask you a little bit about XL, who you coached recently, because as you say, they've much improved. Some of the wins they've had have been pretty legit, actually. And interestingly enough to me, what people might not know is one of the key changes they made, obviously, was bringing in this bot lane, Mystiques and Jeskla. But actually, you guys already tried that in the spring split, but then bizarrely went against it at the end, got rid of them, and they actually looked like they were just going to be gone. So what was going on with that whole aspect? Because that's one of the things I know on my European show. Veteran kind of actually was out on XL because he was like, why the fuck did they not put that bot lane in? Like, that was a team that looked like it was working.
I mean, that is a good question because by the end of that split, we did decide that Mystiques is the guy to start next split because he was very aggressive. He was like ready to make plays. He was not afraid like to play on stage. Basically, the last 2 weeks that we played with Mystiques is to test how good he would be in LEC. But obviously, there was a big coaching staff change. Like everyone pretty much from the coaching staff changed, so they had different opinions, and they wanted to try Kasing and Yarnan instead. But I think what that team really needs is someone really decisive, you know, that will say we're gonna fight now, and like everyone just come mid lane, we fight. This is how Mystic shot goes, you know. He's like, he knows when he wants to fight, he knows when he's strong, he knows when he can make play. He just calls for it. His macro might not be the greatest, and I think when he learns more macro shot calling, he's gonna become a like really good player. But for now, like what he does is enough. He just says, okay, we fight. Like I'm Rakan, I have ultimate, I have W, I have flash. Let's go mid and fight right now. And that's something that a lot of teams are missing. They're just not decisive enough. And if one team is indecisive and just catching farm and waiting for like third item, fourth item, like and the other team just looks for opportunity and takes it, and they take Baron and the game is over, then that team is gonna win more games. That's how XL wins games. They're decisive.
You know, he said there, Loco, that like a different coaching staff came in. Who came in that team? Do you know?
I don't know. Maybe David Lim, Team Kira.
Yeah, it was your boy and I believe protege, David Lim. So what happened?
Why do you not refer to Parth and Dylan as my boys and my protege? They're my original proteges.
Dylan and Parth, right?
Yeah.
So Parth, someone who famously used to just say, "I'm not even a coach." Yeah, I guess he was. He did learn off from you. And then Dylan is the guy who's like, listen, I totally understand now the way that guy's career is gone because he has some talented players and he works with them, but they never quite get to the level they're supposed to, right? Because he's like, I don't know, guys. Like, I think in the next game, I'd like it if you could just do what I was talking about in the practice part. And then they're like, shut the fuck up. Goes, oh, sorry, that's a bit aggressive. I guess, yeah. Come on, man, let's be a leader. We need a bit of fire in the fucking belly, don't we? So
Dylan's smart. Dylan's intelligent.
Excel used to have unlimited potential.
Yeah.
Now they have delimited potential. So that's not the way it should fucking be. It's all I'm saying. That's a put aside. Anyway, the other person I want to ask about, because there's two other players in this team I want to talk about. Because I agree, actually. I think Mystiques is the player who, since coming into the team, has looked pretty fucking good, actually. He looks like he has some real potential. But the other two I wanted to talk about was Kadril, the jungler.
Oh, God.
Who
And expect, right?
Yeah, we'll do Kadril first. What do you think of Kadril?
I think he's a really smart player. There are two types of junglers, right? There's like the instinctive type that they just go for plays, and there's like the calculated control jungler that plays for lanes, and Kadril is in the second category. I think he's really smart about the game, and I enjoyed working with him, but when I worked with Excel, I got them at a really bad time. You know, I just joined when they were on a huge losing streak and like they had big problems with like drafting and like they were lost. So when I joined, like the morale was really down. So it was hard to like motivate people to try their best. So I think that I didn't actually see the best of Excel lineup that they could offer. And this split, they came with a better mindset. Obviously, still lost a lot of games, but they showed like this decisiveness and aggressiveness that made them who they are.
I remember talking to people from H2K, and they were talking about when Kadril was mid, and then he swapped to jungle. Like they were talking about like how intelligent he is, like how hardworking he is. Like I remember he hit like a certain ranking in Korea, also like that was impressive. But from my understanding and from watching Kadril, the intelligence part I can see from jungle pathing, I can see from what people are saying. But one thing that keeps sticking up to me is like crucial, just very simple mechanical like execution, like. And he fails at it, like missing sometimes like Jarvan EQs, like that should never be missed, like not being able to dodge skill shots like that are coming from like max range. Like do I not have enough sample size and I'm just seeing those mistakes, or is that like a flaw of him as a player?
I think his gameplay is generally clean, so I'm not sure. Maybe I haven't been paying close enough attention this split. At least last split, for sure, his gameplay was clean. Like he wasn't making any big mistakes. He wasn't necessarily like the playmaker outside of lane phase, but he was like in lane phase, he would get his lanes ahead, and after that, he would just do whatever the team needed him to do.
I actually find it very interesting that he became like a cerebral type jungler, because what's interesting is since he played mid, this is something I always used to find so bizarre about players, right? Is that there weren't more players who were mid laners who understood the jungle role. Because first of all, if you understand it well, you would be such a better player as a mid laner, even in solo queue. In the same way as if you're an AD carry, I believe your off role should be support. You should learn what you need to be a support, which is why I don't think it's a coincidence. Some of the great support players, Yellow Star, who was Afro Moo. I would even say in Europe, people don't know Vander actually used to be an AD carry. It doesn't surprise me these guys are good support. They used to be an AD carry. They understand what the AD carry needs. Well, here's the bizarre thing. Most mid laners I know, because it's considered like the skill role and like, oh, my mechanics are insane. When they off-roll jungle occasionally, which they don't do half the time because they spend half the time thinking junglers are scum of the earth who don't come to their lane enough. When they do play jungle, they just try to play like carry junglers and fucking carry the game.
Yeah, they play Lisa. Everyone has a Lisa account. What they should do, logically, is play supportive junglers as they would want, go to their mid lane and make him fucking win the game. Like that would be the logical way. So actually, Kadril's done what should be the logical way, but no one else fucking does.
I mean, it's fun trivia, but at the beginning he wasn't really playing around mid and he was trying to pick carry junglers, but I think that's where Jarge influenced him a lot. Like he taught him to play through mid lane, and I mean maybe I took a bit of part of like teaching him how to play control junglers, not even in terms of gameplay, because his gameplay was good, but he wasn't really willing to pick control junglers when I just joined the team. But then after we practiced for a week and we just played like Sejuani Yasuo combs, like Gragas Yasuo combs, he realized that his team can carry if he provides what he needs, what his team needs from the jungle role. So I think since then he started picking Jarvan, Sejuani, just whatever the team needs, and like not play for individual advantage. I think that was his growth at the previous split that is showing this split.
Loco, this even ties into a concept I think you would actually understand, which is the player I would compare Kadril to is Chauster in the end of his time in CLG, because famously at the end
that's not a good comparison for Kadril.
And the point is, this is the funny thing. Fans would think, well, look how bad he is in the game, and they would take all those quotes of Chauster, like everything I say is right, and they'd go, look at this idiot, he's just arrogant. And what they didn't understand was, and I'll say this to this day, Chauster was right. He, at that time, I've talked to a lot of players. He was way ahead of most North American players in understanding of like
knowledge, wave control,
the maps, state, what the roles are all supposed to. He was way ahead. This is back when everyone still thought I'm just supposed to win my lane and then I've won the game. Like people were, they were literally cavemen, and he was like fucking Socrates. Like they're so on it, and then they couldn't understand what he's saying. But here's the problem. There is a type of player, and the reason I give this example is because I've often used this classic example. The other player I'd compare him to is actually Link when he was in CLG. What happens is they have all the knowledge. They have an amazing mind for the game. But because their brain, if you stopped the game in a VOD review, could calculate exactly the right move, they try and do that in the game itself when it's live. And the problem is, in a live game, you're working with limited information, so you can never make the perfect choice. All you can do is figure out like either a good gamble or what seems like the most likely thing you should do. And you have to make that decision pretty quick.
Yeah.
You don't have time to just sit around making that choice. There's no time out. So the problem is there's a phrase, it's called paralysis by analysis, right? And the concept is overthinking or thinking like, well, that's all right, but should I do this? It's like that's an easy way to fuck your game up. You second guess yourself, or you think of the plan, but then because you're still thinking, you don't put your concentration into the actual mechanical execution of it. You fuck it up. Like, this is the reason why it's funny that everyone flames Link now, because they're going to think he was a failure. I'll tell you, he was one of the most talented NA players I ever saw in League of Legends. It's just that he had this weird problem where he was a choker. He just could not get on, and he wouldn't acknowledge it either.
He was a choker, and also he did the Dunzo Manifesto, and also joining TL for a split, and then never doing anything. Like, that's why people flame Link, because like his exit to the scene was just
no.
so
But I think
dirty
people
and
thought he
messy.
was overrated anyway because of the choking, which is like a classic thing. To be fair, people just think that it makes you a shit player. Whereas it's like usually if you choke in that sense, it's like you were a good player. That's why people expected you to do well, and then you didn't. Anyway, should we ask about expect now?
Sure.
Sure. But before that, I want actually to put parenthesis in what you were saying. That I think that's a very common mistake rookie coaches do. They focus too much on the perfect play and on mistakes that the team makes. So that actually creates a team that's very passive, and they're like not looking for openings, but because they're afraid like if they make a mistake, then like people are just gonna talk about their mistake, review the mistake, and their play will never be perfect. So they will never take the opportunity. That's why I respect like players like Mystics, who just like he knows that his plays are like not perfect, not always optimal, but he just sees opportunity, he takes it, and most of the times it works out. Like players usually have really good instincts. They've played so many games, so they know what situation is good. But because they try to create like the perfect situation, they overthink it and they like don't make a play or make a really bad play because they're too late. Yeah.
Anyway,
so this is a parenthesis.
Yeah, I thought it was good. No, like I'd even say as well, like that, I see what you mean there. Like if you can overcoach your team like that, because I'll give you a great example. Is like if you asked most coaches, they would never coach a team to even try any of the things G2 does, because they are so abusive with how they exploit every advantage they see that like the execution required for that is so next level. They have to have the best players in the world, like they do basically. And you even have to have the best players with a similar mindset who all agree to follow it. Like, there's so many factors that just wouldn't work. So it's easier, in theory, when you're a beginner coach, what you think naively is do it the other way. Let's reduce everything down to the basics and we'll slowly build it up. But in doing so, if you do that, as you're kind of saying, you crush the instincts of the player. And what people wouldn't realize is the instincts of a player, if they become a great player, is what allows a team like G2 to exist. If you tried to coach, you could never start from zero with a bunch of rookies and go to where G2 is. Like, it wouldn't work. You have to almost, that's why actually I find their coaching stuff so interesting, because clearly Grabs doesn't coach them like heavily in the way that certain other teams are coached, but I'm sure he has a very interesting approach to how he manages the dynamics and when he lets people think it's their idea and when he has to step in. Like, I bet it's way more interesting than people realize. Like,
And he also has to allow like some of the straight up troll shit they're doing.
Course.
He can't just be like, no. There are some times where he has to allow it and sometimes where he has to disallow it. I think that's going to be the hardest
thing. And it can
thing
work, remember. That's the mad thing in his team. If he lets them do a stupid pick, they might even win the game with it.
I mean, I would like to see what Grabs does. For me, it's really interesting what other coaches do behind the scenes, because it's always like I don't know. You try to guess what they can be doing, and you just guess based on results, but that's kind of useless because results don't really translate from like. I mean, your effort doesn't always translate in the results that you want.
Sure.
Anyway, so
in terms of let's round out the Excel topic. I wanted to ask about expect. So the interesting thing about him for a player, as far as I'm concerned, is when he first came into that G2 lineup a few years ago, I actually initially thought he was bad because I didn't know who he was as a player. And basically, I mean, they obviously didn't play to his lane ever, did they? So it just looked like, it's his job just to come into a team fight at the end of the game. And meanwhile, you looked at the rest of their team, which was super stacked. And you were like, fucking sick player, awesome bot lane. Like, this is and so you looked at the way they played and you thought, but the team's even implying it's bad. But I tell you what, it's when he actually left that team. I only saw some hints of it before, but it's when he left that team and he went, and then the early last year, when they did the EU Masters tournament, that they had the Origin team with Forgiven and Froggen. And it also had, if you remember, it had fucking Jezis and Insec, and it had all these big names, right? And the problem is, the smallest name on that is actually Expect overall, as tied with Jezis, basically. You can't beat a team with like Froggen, Forgiven, Insec. These are legendary, these are Hall of Fame players. Well, here's the problem, like Loco. Because that team won the tournament, people who didn't watch the tournament were like, oh, I bet Froggen and Forgiven just carried the whole tournament. And it's like, Froggen did, but actually Forgiven he had some good games, he had some bad games, he had some up and down. He was out of shape. It was actually Expect was the other fucking really good player. Like, I remember watching going like, this guy was way better than I give him credit for. When you actually like let him play the game, he's pretty good. So I even think in LEC, I think he was hard done by being on XL when they were the worst team. Like, I remember thinking, what the fuck? There's a bunch of teams. SK is a great example. I would take this guy in a heartbeat if I could. Like, he's clearly a better player than that. So I think he's a solid LEC player. I don't really know how he's ended up in XL in that regard. What do you think about him?
I think he's like a really... Oh, sorry, Loco, you want to say?
Well, I feel like Korean imports aren't like premier in EU. Like, people aren't like actively searching for imports, and if they are, it's like as the last slot. Like, kind of.
They also didn't have much money for them, to be fair. So you have to kind of get bad players or unknowns.
Kind of like Misfits. Like, Misfits found Gorilla at the end because they found other 4 pieces, and they're like, oh, we want to make a championship level roster, and then they got Gorilla. I mean, we can laugh about like how bad that roster was, but they didn't like start with Gorilla. Where in NA, a lot of times like you start with like a huge import piece and you build your team around it. I'd imagine it's completely the other way in Europe, where you
well, best example was when Echo Fox decided to build around Hooney instead of Froggen, and as a result, Froggen didn't end up on the team.
Yeah. Where in Europe, I would imagine like you build all your EU pieces first, and you feel like you can push towards championship, and then you pick up a really big Korean piece. So that's why I feel like...
I wish I knew how EU teams choose their roster, because I think they're just throwing darts at the wall and they get random pieces. That's how it feels like, at least. I haven't been part of the roster selection process, but I think Expect is a really, really solid player. He knows his lane and his matchup really, really well. And he will always pick something that will go even or win the lane. Like, he will never pick something that's going to lose the lane. He's not going to allow his coach to pick it, and because he will know that he's not going to be able to perform. And if he's going to pick something slightly losing, he's still going to go even, because he knows the fundamentals of laning really, really well. And Kedriel and him have really good synergy. They've been duo queuing a lot since like the start of the previous split, and Kedriel has been playing heavily for his lane because he knows that Expect can carry when he's ahead. I think if Expect has a flow, that's translating his advantage into the rest of the team, because his communication is lacking, and especially in scrims, he would often just not communicate that much and would make practicing playing around him pretty hard. But I think overall he's like really, really solid and good player, like with very good fundamentals. I think most Korean tops are like this, right? That's how it feels like.
Yeah, I mean, to be a professional Korean top laner, you have to be really fucking good, because Korean tops in general are good. So anyone that is like getting imported, anyone that's good, already went through like all the learning lessons.
And also, I'll even say as well, to be fair, one of the reasons I actually would even expect a little more leeway than a Western player is in Korea, if ever they have a good player as the top laner, the team actually plays around them. And like the whole concept is like their connection with the jungler is different. So like it's not like you're just a good player and maybe he comes to lane, maybe he does, like the whole system is going to be built in. So actually your coaches are going to be telling you what you're going to do. They're going to tell the players what to do. Like one of the things about Western teams is players themselves are trying to figure these things out. They're trying to have a say in who does what and at what time. And as a result, if you're a guy who's a foreigner coming in and you're speaking a second language, like you're not going to be the most confident necessarily, or know how to. You might not even know the way a conversation flow is going or how to read what someone's saying. You know, there's a lot of that's the reason why I always give a slight, like, little bit extra benefit of the doubt to any one Korean playing in a Western region. It's like because the problem is the people who want to, like, this is the best way to describe it, right? Because people have overrated some Koreans, or the concept that all Koreans are the best. They love it when a Korean goes to the West and fails. They think like, see, he was fake. Wasn't that good all along? And it's like, well, no, he wasn't in the same circumstances, was he? Before he was playing with Koreans in Korea with a Korean coach speaking Korean. Now he's doing none of those things. Like you haven't just made him play the game differently. He has to play in a totally different universe, basically. So I give him. That's why any of them who actually succeed, I give him a lot of credit. Like what a fucking unbelievable feat that must be to do.
I mean, I think you should get 2 Koreans in the team if you're gonna go for a Korean.
Of course,
The puppy rule.
Agreed.
If you get 1 puppy, the puppy gets lonely. Get 2 puppies so they play with each other.
Okay.
Yeah.
Unlimited, you're on 2 teams previously that had Korean import mids. Like, what do you think about importing mids in EU, where it is like the region of so many good EU mids?
Did you mean like because of XL as well?
Yeah, because of XL and then SK.
They didn't have Nikki.
Oh, they did
Yeah,
have Nikki. Okay,
he was-
well, what's your general thoughts on Korean imports
Okay.
in EU? In mid lane,
I
in mid lane
think
especially.
they're redundant. I don't think you should import mid laners. First of all, it's a role that impacts them up a lot, so being able to communicate with your team well, I think is pretty crucial. I think it's same with the junglers. I think Korean top laner is actually pretty fitting because they're really good mechanically and you don't need to participate as much with the team. Yeah, I think mostly top lane imports are good from my experience. The mid lane, I mean, honestly, there are too many good EU mid laners to need to import a Korean. Even if they're good, the communication barrier is gonna like reduce this. Like for Pyrian, for example, his communication barrier. I mean, his English was fine, you know, but during the game he wouldn't communicate as clearly as a European mid would be with self-made, which means that self-made is not gonna come at the right timings mid lane to like give him an advantage, which will make him look worse, right? So I don't think that importing Koreans in mid lane is good for you.
Okay.
It would be like fucking importing snow to fucking Alaska, Loco. Like, what's the point? It's right, look around you. It's right there, mate. What's the point in bringing that in? Also, think about it. I'll even give the analogy. Some of the snow's going to melt on the way. Just take the snow that's fucking here. Why take the Korean and make him worse? Yeah, literally reach your hand blindly into the top of snow with you. Pick the player out. Oh, look, it's the next decade. Cool. Nice. That's why I'm not even joking. There's another thing. You can go all the way back on all those shows. I used to say way back in the day on Some of the Insight, I can't believe that actually all these NA teams don't just make it their focus to get the up-and-coming mids that haven't yet got... Like, the point is, if you were on Fnatic, you might be able to do better than NA at Worlds. You're not going to leave Fnatic. But if you were the guy who was coming up in Europe, that's when I would have gone and got them if I'd have been the team. I know TSM did it, but, you know, if I was all the other teams, Cloud9, I think, should have done it way earlier. Like, I would have gone and got all these players.
I mean, if you see this year, right, there is Humanoid, there is Nemesis. I mean, I don't want to... Genex looks pretty good so far.
Good games, yeah.
Leader.
Yeah, I mean, I guess leader as well, but there's a lot of talent that can become really, really good in the future, and they're already really, really good. So I'm sure there are a lot of players that just are not picked for any team or are playing in national teams. Like all of these players were just picked from national teams, right? And they weren't really.
If we're gonna list all these players, the one we've forgotten is Larson. We've got to throw him in.
Oh yeah, of course.
That guy's really fucking good.
Hey, Larson as well.
Abe's looking better this split than he did last split. Also, there's like a lot of people coming on.
He's all right. His problem is a bit too much like his coach, if you ask me.
I mean, I worked with Abadagi. He's not very vocal, and I don't think that makes a good mid laner. I mean, you need to be able to communicate with your team well when you play mid lane.
Dylan was so political when he came on the show. He's like, no, it's not Abadage's fault. It's me that didn't enable him. I was like, oh my god. Abadage just looks so quiet. And I'm like,
I think it was the mixture of the two, probably.
I mean, the thing is, I also kind of feel like that, right? We had to change Pyrian, but that means that we as a coaching staff failed to make that lineup work because they should work. They're good players. And if they don't work, then it's on us. And having to replace a player, that's actually one of my worst nightmares because first I have to admit that I fucked up, you know? And then I actually have to
tell the player bye.
Yeah, and then I need to make it work with a new player because if I don't, then I fail both of the players twice. So.
What you do is you just say, listen, Pyrian, I know you've been missing home and Korean food, so I'll fix that for you. Anyway, here's the first class ticket. See you, mate. No. I mean, hope you make it.
The interesting part is that when you're on a losing team, players actually
want to leave.
Are kind of fine with leaving because they they want the break. Like there's too much stress, like bad atmosphere, all this stuff that after they actually take a break, then they feel much better about life. Like it was same with Excel. Like the players that went back to Twickenham, to London, to the academy team, they were like so much happier. They were so much more full of life. You couldn't believe, the change. Like they just got kicked from LEC, like they shouldn't be so happy, right? But they actually were. I think it's true for every player that they would rather be on a winning, happy team than to be on a losing team in the highest league.
So what you're saying is, especially for XL, you've got to go big or go home. That's why I get paid the big bucks, Loco. Like, you guys can't do shit like that.
Yeah, I guess not.
Not bad, was it?
Duncan, Unlimited. Do you guys have final topics you guys want to hit on?
Shit, has it been 2 hours already?
Yeah, it's time flies. All right.
Yeah, here's the thing. I know we didn't talk about many of the other ICC teams, but like I said, I thought we'd have a different episode. We do like a bit of a unique one.
Can we at least like tease at the TSM stuff? Like let's tease at it. So, I Will Dominate dropped that Zben and Acadian have been arguing throughout like the split, and it's like an open secret that that's a point of conflict. And I also heard the same thing, and I just confirmed. Dom leaked it, and I just confirmed, and then it's an open secret because Dom was talking about how he heard it at Fed's birthday. He heard it at like a party. So
who the fuck is Fed?
Fed is Dom.
Roger Federer. They were at fucking Swiss professional 37-year-old, 20-time Grand Slam player Federer. You have to say who these people are. Okay. Who the fuck is Fed? I don't know this guy.
Fed is a member of Offline TB. Offline TB is a group of streamers
I know
like
that.
Scara,
it's the streamer group that I don't.
And then Fed is close with Dom because Fed used to be Dom's editor.
Okay. Right, there we go.
Okay.
Unsurprising, I don't know who the fuck I Will Dominate's editor is.
So anyways, what do you think about the news that throughout like the season there was a point of conflict between Acadian and Zben? Does it surprise you at all?
I do think it surprised me that it'd be those two players. Like, you wouldn't... I don't really look at those two players and see them as the ones with the big egos who'd be, like, clashing, etc. But I will say, think about it logically, those are probably the two players who've been the worst players on TSM this split. So it doesn't surprise me that players who are both doing badly might blame each other or not be able to get along, which in itself might be part of why you're playing badly. I think it actually makes sense to some degree.
I also think, like, EU West thing has to play a little bit into it, where the culture in EU is just so different, where Acadian is more of like, if you see him outside of the game, he's like very bro-y. Like, one thing that people probably don't understand about Acadian is like, you look at Acadian and then he's like buff, like he has a cute girlfriend, like he's...
Here we go.
What? No,
I know where this is going.
You think of him as like a mega Chad. Like, you think of him as someone that's just like Johnny Bravo, like that's gonna like...
I mean, he looks like Thad Castle from Blue Mountain State. Kinda.
He looks like someone that's like he's gonna steal your girlfriend, he's gonna beat you up, like that's what he looks like. But he's actually incredibly nice in person, and then he's a bro, like he just wants to have fun with his bros. And I think like that's where I see like the personality clash, and that's where I see like the conflict between like Zben and Acadian, where Zben is like hardcore, like about the game, like we need to be fucking good, where an Acadian is more like let's everyone get along. Like,
you've nailed it in a way, Loco. You've nailed it in a way. The problem is, this is actually something, believe it or not, that bizarrely came up on the live show I do with Veteran Call It Elitists on the Line that we do after LEC on the second play day each week. And what happened was we were discussing on that show the fact that, like, one thing I think is mad overrated is where people in esports try to push this thing of like all the pro players are working out in the gym, and a healthy body and a healthy mind, like you've got to, like, that's going to help you, when you have like your levels up, like, even though in theory they're right. The problem is, I think to actual video games, which involve just sitting at a computer, it adds so little that unless you're already a brilliant player, I don't think it's going to add much. And I don't think even like my joke was, if you go and find me someone like Acadian who looks fucking super fit and then you hear he's a pro, you'd think, wow, he must be well-rounded, probably the best pro, right? I can go find you someone right now who looks like the 90s stereotype of a hacker from a movie who's got fucking Cheetos driving out his face. He's fat as fuck. He probably can barely move out his chair, and he'll dominate the fuck out of an Acadian because he's just in the game 24/7. He's going all along, just shooting. He's literally just like got one of those hats that with the fucking Mountain Dew on the side, like a beer cans, drinking that while he's playing, right? So, but here's the point I'm going to get to, right? So think about who Sven and Acadian are. This is the one last thing we'll do, and I won't go too much in the real analysis because we'll tease that for tomorrow. Here's the analogy for you, right? So Veteran's point was, not only is that the case, but obviously there's even going to be people where that actually might even show who's more confident about themselves in the game, because what tends to happen is the people who are the fat mess or look terrible, that's all they've got in life is the game. They build their whole identity on like, at least I'm the best in the fucking game. So as a result, they're also going to be super confident in the game. They're going to put all their effort into it. They're going to grind super hard. The guy who's like working out, sometimes, I know in real life, a lot of them are the chads and like pumping each other up. Sometimes that comes from insecurity. They're like, oh, but I'm a weedy little nerdy gamer. Oh, I better start working out. Oh, look, girls, I'm for real. But then the problem is then they get the party lifestyle, they get a girlfriend. I bet when Sven sees that, he's over there, he's some fucking stick-thin, emaciated motherfucker who looks like, unless he won 50 solo queue games a day, he didn't get to eat Loco. He was eating cabbage soup, motherfucker, because he had to get the new Razer mouse, so he had to like DPI in the game. And he's been dominating motherfuckers. He's been having Forgiven talk shit to him, and he's been winning championships. And then he comes over to NE, he's heard all this shit about TSM, like, oh, it's so fucking so professional stuff. And then their junglers over like, what up, bro? Yeah, shit, bro, what, bro, what?
Day life.
Just me and the girls, we just out partying, bro. Listen, I'll pass your name later, bro. Like, whatever. And then obviously he's just like, what the fuck is this? He used to have trick. He used to have a Korean dude, whatever he said. He was living a dream. It's like, I'm the butler. I'm the Korean jungler. Like, I'm the fucking butler. You hit that thing. Yes, sir. What is it? You're like, yeah, 4 fucking creatures, bullshit out. That's the end of the show, I think. That's going to be the end at this point.
Unlimited, thank you so much for being on. Doran, thank you for being a great host as always.
This was fun.
It was fun for me too.
Yeah.
I'll see
Cheers,
you guys
man.
later.
Thank you.
Take care.
Cheers.
Thank you to our gold Patreon supporters, Butt Pounder 420, Tobias Bernasconi, and Icelandic C9 fan. Without you guys, the show would be possible. Yeah, I mean, thank you to everyone that subbed today. Thank you to everyone that tuned in today. We actually got a lot of viewers. We actually got a lot of subs also. I loved you guys. Without you guys, the show wouldn't be possible. I say it all the time, but I genuinely really enjoy doing the show, and I'm so happy that we got to do the show today. Yeah, I did miss some subs. And also, the Patreon isn't fully updated. I will update it for the next episode.